Don't have any residents requests to speak tonight.
And before you go on, I
Yes.
just want to announce the reason the meeting started late is because the board met expects session to receive information from our solicitor. So that's the reason the meeting started late. And roll call, I believe everyone will be here except for Mr. Maris. Mr. Garber is
Somewhere.
present. He's just a little behind. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson, and you can continue.
Right. We're going to start with the education and programs tonight. So, Dr. Dandridge.
Our first presentation this evening, we have Mr. Ashley and Ms. Dicely to talk about our unified PE course.
On now? Now I am. Okay. Tonight, Mr. Ashley and I are here to talk about a course proposal that we have that would go into effect in 2025-26. So not for this coming school year, but the school year after that. We'd like to look at a unified physical education class. As you're aware, we have a unified track team, and this would follow that same kind of premise. I'm going to let Mr. Ashley give some details on it, but we currently have an adaptive PE class that our physical education teachers teach for our students in the life skills classes. So that already exists. And what we would be looking at doing is including in that same class general education students so that we would have approximately the same number of general education students and students with IEPs in the class working side by side in the same kind of format that we use in that unified track. So I'll turn it over and let Mr. Ashley talk some more, and then we'll see if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. So we are excited about the possibility of offering this course. We feel like it would be really valuable for both our regular ed students that might engage in the class, as well as for the special ed education students. It would create opportunities for them to connect and build relationships with regular ed students, which will be excellent for them. And the regular ed students may have an interest in education or perhaps be on the unified track and field team. It would be a chance for them to continue getting experience and provide leadership opportunities for them to engage in that class. So we're excited about the possibilities. I know other schools have begun to offer this as well, and we feel like it would be great for our Hempfield students to be able to offer.
And this would count as the student's PE credit for their junior year if they would choose to do it that way, or could technically be an elective as well.
That's right. It would be meeting the state standards required for that 11th grade year, or as you said, electives for seniors. We wouldn't have any additional costs involved with this because the equipment that we currently use in our adaptive class would be able to be used in this course, and there would be no additional need for faculty or any teachers. So we feel like we can offer it with no additional cost to the district. Are there any questions?
Is there any additional type of certification needs?
There would not be. The
No.
teacher is already certified for this. Yeah.
Thank
Mhm.
Have you seen much interest from students already in participating in a course like this? I know that the track team is great and has great interest. Just curious how enrollment would be.
Yeah, so anecdotally, we've had some conversations with a few students that are involved in the Unified Track and Field program, and they've expressed interest in being involved, but we haven't done surveys or anything to really have data to provide at this point. So there may be a few, or maybe a large number. We don't really know.
Apologize if you said that while I was specifying.
That's okay.
And we also, I know I've been talking to Mr. Landis that they're researching the unified bocce team as an option. And one of his biggest concerns with that is that there is a limit to the number of kids that can be on that team. And he's worried that we're going to have far more kids on it. Like the unified track, we can accept more than you can with the bocce. So I know he's already seeing an interest in that. So I really think that this is a class that, if anything, we will have more students who want to take it than we can allow to have it, because we would want that ratio to be basically a one-on-one.
Approximately how long do you anticipate it will take to write the curriculum?
We are thinking that we could do that this summer, probably in as few as 6 to 8 hours of time.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear it's so little
Yeah.
time. Is there any reason we can't get this done and put it on for next fall? It seems like a great idea. And if that's all the longer it'll take to write the
Mhm.
curriculum, then can we just, assuming the board approves it, can we just make a push to get this on for next fall?
Unfortunately, we've
Good.
already done course selection for next year, so it's not
Can't
something
we
that
give
we
a
can.
chance to just reopen it and let people do it?
It's a really big process and there's staffing implications that are closed other classes that are already signed up. So we need to be preparing for when we build the master schedule.
Right, but this is not open to the entire student body. This is only our special education students, right?
No, the adaptive PE class already exists for our special education class. This is opening it up to general education students to be in the same class with them.
Okay.
So I have a couple,
Oh, okay.
I have a few questions if you don't mind. Walk me through some of the activities that I would find if I were a student taking a class like this.
So there would be lots of, well, the fundamental motor skills that are listed here. So a lot of catching, striking skills, throwing skills,
Okay.
kicking skills, a lot of the eye-hand coordination kinds of things, some basic agility, mostly fundamental motor skills, jumping, hopping, skipping, running, that type of thing.
Very good. The reason I ask is, I'm a fan. I think this is really cool. It's a great idea. I just want to make sure that we have, safety is covered off on, right? So there's a reason why Olympics and Paralympics are separate. There are reasons why, you know what I mean? Like, so, a student that has a really good arm and is the pitcher for the baseball team, throwing and catching is great for any student to learn. But if that student that is a special needs student, won't be able to catch a 74-mile-an-hour ball, are we address, you know what I mean? Like, I want to make sure that we're not putting someone in a compromising position.
Yeah, excellent thought. Part of the responsibility of the teacher is to make sure the equipment that's being used is safe and appropriate. So we'd be using Nerf balls and beach balls and that kind of thing for a lot of activities. And then some of it is training of the regular ed students who would be in there to make sure that they're understanding that they are throwing to a student who wouldn't be able to catch a 75-mile-an-hour fastball.
Okay.
So,
So these are things that we are considering, we're addressing. It's not lost on us, right?
correct.
Of course.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's my understanding that it's a different kind of learning experience for the regular ed kids. It's not that they're so much developing their own physical, it's that they're learning how to guide more of a
Correct.
teaching
Yes.
experience for them.
They would be more in a leadership role and serving almost as a buddy, like a
Right.
buddy system.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why we will have to write some curriculum for this, because for those students, it's different than what's actually happening right now in the adaptive PE class, because they will be hopefully facilitating lessons, and that part of their class will be leading some of these activities and not just the buddy piece, but we want to get them into more of a leadership role in the class as well.
It's great to build future educators as well.
And not only like future educators, but I picture like OTs and PTs in elementary schools, like when I'm in the elementary schools, and I mean, that's what'll be going on as in high school and developing those relationships. It's awesome.
Right. And part of it would be the fitness development. I didn't mention, when I mentioned the fundamental motor skills, I didn't mention, the push-ups and sit-ups and flexibility and things that OT and PT would be doing. So the students will have a chance to do that as well.
I have two questions. I know you mentioned bocce, that you only could do one team and you felt like that might be overcrowded. Did I understand that correctly?
Right, I just mentioned that because Mr. Landis has been looking at that as an extracurricular activity, and I know that there's a lot of interest in that. I don't have details on the unified bocce team, just that that's something that's growing at schools around here as well, just like unified track is. And that is something that is an inside sport in the winter that they have to limit the team size.
So can we have two teams
Hey, that would be a Mr. Landis question.
or three or whatever?
Are you volunteering to coach one?
No,
She wants to play, Tab. She wants to play bocce.
I'm
Who
actually
doesn't?
not very good at bocce. Okay, thanks. Sounds like a great idea. And so the buddies that come, are they going to be there used to be what was called like a buddy club, I think. So do you anticipate them coming or just other students coming?
These would be students who would be enrolled in the course. They would just have a different role than the special education students.
Okay.
So
And then if there's special therapeutic needs for some of the students, I have no idea if this already takes place. Would those also be addressed for those particular students?
yes, their program would not change. They would just have a regular ed student joining them to assist or participate with them.
Right, thank you.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Anything else for us? Thank you.
I just wanted to
appreciate
say thank you for your support for our sports officiating course that was approved by this group. We were able to get that into sports, into the curriculum guide, and seem to have quite a bit of interest from the students and in the community. So thank you for supporting that as well.
That it's speaking as an official, it's honestly, it's a big deal. There is a huge decline, as you know, in officiating in every sport for a lot of different reasons. So if we can kind of reinvigorate that that passion on that side of the sports world, be really big. Otherwise you think about, in all seriousness, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, you won't have high school sports. That's simple. So.
We were getting so much attention on that class that I eventually told Mrs. Burkholder that we weren't doing any more interviews unless they were national level.
Very cool.
I'm glad
Thank
to hear
you.
it's going well. Thank you. Okay,
All right.
next
Mark,
is
thank you for my next part.
artificial intelligence.
I'll invite Mr. Hoffman to join us up here. Our next presentation, as you said, is on artificial intelligence. And as you know, we did give the board an update on AI last year. And really, it was kind of on the beginning of AI threat and service to explosion that we've seen over the past year. So Mr. Paul, Mr. Hoffman, Ms. Dicey, Dr. Musser, and I attended a really informative workshop at Kutztown University over the past several months. It was 3 days, pretty intensive training. We wanted to bring back some of the information that we learned and some of the implications that we might have in the field. So I'm going to let Dr. Musser read us all.
So before we go to the first slide there, I want you to know we really struggle with this presentation because we do a lot of these. We got some canned presentations. We clean up some numbers. You know how it works. This is one of those situations where we had the ability to have some of this AI information shared in small chunks so I could put my brain back together and understand how this is going to affect education. Some of this stuff was really quite eye-opening. So we tried to balance the presentation tonight with a little bit of shock, like, wow, this is out there, without too much. So I hope we hit that mark for the board. So I really want you to walk away with AI as a tool and how it's going to impact education as we move forward. So with that said, I'll let Mr. Paul click on to the next slide.
Technology really is this
Uh,
easy.
This was, that was not AI. That was actually me that made that one.
I wonder if we're looking at Alexa. Is that actually her? Why not?
What do you want?
She is.
The purpose of this presentation is to provide additional information pertaining to AI and how district administration is exploring the potential impact of AI on student learning.
So the reason I use this to kick off the presentation is that that's all fake. She's 100% fake. Everything in there is fake. It took me about 5 minutes to create this just with my keyboard. She's part of a program. There's 45 to 50 different people, depending on how you want to, what you want to pay, that can deliver any messaging, any educational topic, anything that you feel that you can type into the keyboard, you can make these people do. Pretty interesting stuff. Obviously, some really neat applications to education. So wanted to use a little bit of a interest catcher with her and let you know that there are some districts out there that are using AI to actually deliver some sub lessons and fill into some gaps, as opposed to some of those handouts we used to get or some of those cheesy videos when we were in school. Now teachers can work with other kids and have videos running in the background of the instruction, and you can make your own person even. So next slide, please. The other piece before we go with this video, and again, we don't bring a ton of videos before the board. I also wanted to share that AI as a tool is really revolutionizing what we're doing in education. I'm at that age where when I was doing video editing, I had to ship it off to the IU and they made it digital and they shipped it back to me. And 6 weeks later, I had it and I could cut it up on a computer and then ship it back. And that would have taken me, probably about 6 months to get that same product that I just did in 5 minutes. And all these tools are making all these things so much readily available to our students in such a quicker time period.
So anyone who's been paying attention for the last few months has been seeing headlines like this, especially in education. The thesis has been students are going to be using ChatGPT and other forms of AI to cheat, do their assignments. They're not going to learn, and it's going to completely undermine education as we know it. Now, what I'm going to argue today is not only are there ways to mitigate all of that, if we put the right guardrails, we do the right things, we can mitigate it. But I think we're at the cusp of using AI for probably the biggest positive transformation that education has ever seen. And the way we're going to do that is by giving every student on the planet an artificially intelligent but amazing personal tutor. And we're going to give every teacher on the planet an amazing artificially intelligent teaching assistant. And just to appreciate how big of a deal it would be to give everyone a personal tutor, I show you this clip from Benjamin Bloom's 1984 2 Sigma study, or he called it the 2 Sigma problem. The 2 Sigma comes from 2 standard deviations, sigma the symbol for standard deviation. And he had good data that showed that, look, a normal distribution, that's the one that you see in the traditional bell curve right in the middle, that's how the world kind of sorts itself out, that if you were to give personal one-to-one tutoring for students, that you can actually get a distribution that looks like that right. It says tutorial one-to-one with the asterisk, like that right distribution, a 2 standard deviation improvement. Just to put that in plain language, that could take your average student and turn them into an exceptional student. It can take your below average student and turn them into an above average student. Now, the reason why he framed it as a problem was he said, well, this is all good, but how do you actually scale group instruction this way? How do you actually give it to everyone in an economic way?
So I want to draw your attention to what he said there at the end. The reason it's a problem is because it's not scalable. We can't have a teacher for each student. But with AI, we really can. And some of these tutoring bots and some of these systems, I actually explored a office assistant who was fake. We got along well, but it only acted with things that I put into this system. But it's still a great advantage to our students. And there's a couple other advantages from the tutoring lens that I'd like to talk about next. So we're always talking about personalized learning paths and meeting kids where they're at and giving them what they need and accelerating those kids. And that's always one of those arts of teaching. Some of these AI bots, they're self-aware. They learn about the student. They learn about where the student's at, and they adjust to meet the student to where they need to go next. They also adapt some of the feedback. So if you're typing in a response and I'm typing in a response, sometimes the feedback we're going to get is going to be different because of the AI's understanding of the student typing in some of this information. The other piece is it's always interactive. We know that students respond well to games. We know the gaming culture right now, but there's that interactive piece that students are striving to achieve, and it can't always come from teachers nowadays. The piece that I think is one of the most attractive things is probably the next 2 bullets. It's available 24/7. Sometimes when I procrastinate too long in my paper, I didn't finish it till my mom was in bed. I knew that wasn't getting proofed. Like now, you can take that whole paper that you wrote, You can scan it into any number of these AI machines, bots, websites, and they can proof your paper and they can suggest, hey, you switch to passive language over here, or your verb usage is out of line over here. All that can happen at any point, whether the parent is away working in a job overnight. There's always access to everyone. And the other piece of that is it's free. And especially for this district is a one-to-one district. You know, we've really leveled the playing field with these free AI pieces. And I want to be clear, we don't have these aren't in wide use right now. We're just making the board aware what's potentially out there. And we really just want you to walk away knowing that AI is a tool much like the internet. When the internet came out, we were like, well, that changes education. Everybody's going to Google everything. We don't need to do anything. AI has a lot of that fear for a lot of us right now. And that's why we shared the ChatGPT articles. There's a lot of us out there that are like, well, we can't write papers anymore. We can't do this assignment anymore. We can do all these things. We just have to have some guardrails in place, and we'll talk about them later and maybe modify a little bit of how we're looking and assessing some of these assignments, similar to like we were into the pandemic, if you remember some of the adjustments we made with assignments. Some of the real advances in AI has a lot to do with translation. There's so many neat devices out there. You've all seen the phone where you hold it the one direction and it translates back and forth. There's pens, there's necklaces you can wear now. There's all kinds of AI technology to overcome that language barrier. One of the things that I also think is incredibly useful now, and I've actually shared with different teachers and different staff members, is some of the test prep stuff. If you remember, anyone actually study for the SAT? It's not really a thing, but there was a couple SAT, yeah, you probably did. There was a couple SAT prep books out there. There was some online software with a CD-ROM, you answered a couple questions and you were on the pathway. There's so many test prep situations that actually provide you feedback. So it knows what you're getting right. It answers questions or asks questions that you're getting wrong and keeps revisiting those questions. And it actually tailors itself to help students prepare for some of these tests. Yes.
The preview example here, is that just an example for purposes of this presentation?
Yeah.
Or is that something that's actually?
No, that's actually real. So that's just one of the tutoring. I just went into a tutoring section. And again, I was going to play another video, but I'm sensitive to playing too many videos. I just wanted to share that. I just went into I think that's the math tutoring. And it just said, hey, what are we looking to do today? What's the plan? And then you put in, and you can just speak. You can see right down there, the box says you can just speak. You can just sit here and go back and forth with your tutor.
So I guess, and maybe we're not looking at this the right way, but I look at that prompt, and that prompt is problematic for me. Because if you're using ACT, SAT scores, and tell me what your goal is, tell me what school you want to get into. These are aptitude tests, they're not knowledge tests. And unless the AI bot knows the student's inherent baseline, the student could be putting in a completely unrealistic objective.
Yeah, fair enough. If the student uses it once, that'll be the case. But as it's supposed to be used and they use it multiple times, it knows the student, starts to learn their responses and adapts with them.
And then at some point,
That's what's
the bot
scary.
say, we need to stop talking about hope.
Yeah.
I mean, or I guess that's what I'm trying to
It's-
understand.
It's not that direct yet, but it certainly has the ability to do so. I mean, some of the, and again, I want to be respectful with the board's time. And if you're really interested in this at some point, swing by my office. I know I get a bad rap for only going to lunch, but swing by my office and I'd love to show you some of these tools, like some of the tutoring tools and the feedback that's given. And I know the fear of so many community members and board members is it's a cheating tool. Some of these tutoring bots won't let you actually ask the question. If the question is like, it's referring to, how many states are in the United States and the person puts it in, it'll say, well, I'm not here for that. I'm your tutor. Like, well, how many states did we originally start with? Like, and it'll start to work the student through. It will not actually answer the questions for the students. So like, this stuff's a little scary. I'm going to give you permission. It's a little scary. And the more you put in, the more it knows about you. But there is some real strength here for some of our students as we can apply this moving forward. We just need to make sure we have some of those guardrails in place. And Kathy and Jason are going to talk a little bit more about those in the next couple slides.
So one of the things that we really looked at it when we were going through this conference was how do we use this with students? And how do we make sure that students understand how it's used appropriately? And one of the kind of scenarios that they posed for us was to really think about this sort of as a traffic light, which is a very common way for all kids to kind of approach this and for teachers to approach it. So basically red means there's no AI for this assignment. So AI is not appropriate for this. It's something that you are doing on your own. Yellow is something where maybe some AI pieces are used with the teacher approval of that. There may be some parts of the assignment that it's okay for, but not others. And then green is full AI. So you can use it for the entire project. And what we'll see as we go through further slides is there's a lot of higher level thinking that's involved in the use of artificial intelligence. It's not just kids getting answers to questions like how many states are there in the US. It's actually pushing them to think more critically and creatively, which is actually our goal in the end. So while it can be scary at first, as you start looking at how it can be applied, it really helps further our mission to graduate students that can think critically and creatively.
So what are some of those real applications in the classroom? Here's just a list of ideas that could be used. The first one is something that Dr. Musser already mentioned, the idea of putting text into a chat box and then asking for feedback. Not that different than asking mom or dad to proofread your paper, but that is one option. Another option is to brainstorm ideas for a research paper. So like as an idea generator, I can't decide what to write about. And you can start putting in some prompts and start getting brainstorm lists of ideas. And
Without getting too far down in the weeds, can we try that? I would be fascinated to see how that works. I mean, just like.
the brainstorming ideas,
Yeah, like just as an example, this is.
I would need Jeremy to open Chat GPT and start playing around with it. So while Jeremy's opening that up, I'll talk about some of the other ones that are on here. The third bullet is practice paraphrasing skills. And I just saw this one in an educational article this past week. So you teach students what paraphrasing means so that when they're writing their research paper, they're not plagiarizing. But then you can start practicing with it with Chat GPT. You can put a text in and ask Chat GPT to paraphrase it. And then the students can analyze whether it is an acceptable paraphrase or is plagiarism. Another example would be to analyze bias in writing. In fact, that's one of the things that we see as we're reading articles about the artificial intelligence is there often bias in what's coming through and in the responses when you ask a question. So you can start asking for that. Ask a prompt and then have student research to evaluate the accuracy. I had seen this in the York papers last year where a historian for York County put into Chat GPT, what are the 10 most significant events in York County history? And then he, as a historian, evaluated which ones he agreed with and which ones he didn't agree with and why. And that's the kind of activity that we could get kids doing to analyze, what kind of answers are they getting? And then we're getting them into deeper thinking. Another example on here says, ask for sample questions on a topic to practice. This one I added because a few weeks ago when my son was taking physics in the first semester, he said, yeah, I've never used ChatGPT at all. And I just decided to give it a try because I was struggling with these physics questions and I didn't know how to do it. So I put into ChatGPT and said, can you give me some sample problems about, and then he explained what the topic was. ChatGPT gave him a bunch of practice problems. Guess what? He learned how to do it. He could also put them in there and say, tell me step by step how to solve this. So that gets back to that tutoring idea, again, that Dr. Musser was talking about, because he was doing those problems late at night and he was able to get that answer and support right there as he was working through it. Ask sample questions or ask for step-by-step instructions, as I mentioned for the last one, and then use AI to create a product such as a video or other presentation. As Dr. Musser mentioned with that very first video at the very beginning, that took just a couple minutes to enter text, pick which character and voice you wanted to do, and then put that together. When we ask students to do final projects, sometimes they are spending more time on the project than on the research that goes into the project. And we want kids to be able to go deep into things. So instead of spending many class periods teaching them how to edit video, when really our ultimate goal is the content that we want, kids can still do all that content, but that final product will take much less time. And that'll shift where we can focus things in the classroom. All right, that's my list. You have,
And why he's transitioning over, I'm really into this. I know this is in my slide. You can actually talk to Isaac Newton if you want. There's an Isaac Newton chat bot built with all the information for him to respond. There's George Washington, where kids can actually ask him questions like, why'd you pick the Delaware? Things like that. And the chatbots respond as the people in history would. Like, this stuff is free too. So Mr. Keener, ChatGPT, you don't have to download it, get right on the web, free account.
Yeah.
Why don't you type in something like, we have an eco lit class, and so they do research papers related to that. So why don't you do something like, what would be ideas for a high school research paper on environmental issues? Start with something like that. And what's great about ChatGPT is we can see what kind of responses it gives and then continue to ask follow-up questions to help refine that a little bit.
Mine's gonna be low.
And you then say, make it relevant for 11th grade.
Well, did you put high school in the prompt?
Yeah, put high school in the prompt.
Yeah.
Will it work to refine potentially based on?
Yep.
Yeah, and that's,
So what if we started with, I want to write a paper about the environment and don't, your question, Mrs. Dicey, was very nuanced and probably much more nuanced than a typical high school student would articulate.
So no matter, like, you could start with something that general, but what's great is you can, as Mr. Bermercy is saying, you can keep asking follow-up questions. If what you get is way too general, like I saw something on there on water scarcity. So I could now say, oh, that interests me, and then ask a follow-up question on water scarcity.
Okay.
Tell me more about water scarcity in North America only. And he can put that in, and it's going to keep, it remembers what you put in for your first prompt, and then it continues to refine based on what you're getting. If you don't like what you're getting, you just ask better and better questions. And that's actually part of the skill that kids need to learn. It's just like when the internet first came out and we had to learn how to use search engines and what kind of prompts we were going to put into search engines. And, I remember so I'm old enough in teaching that I remember having to go to the IU and get trained on the internet and then sign away a 85-page acceptable use policy to be able to use the internet in school. And we had all these trainings on how to do effective searches in Google and how to use and ors and which one is a Boolean and which one isn't for searches. That's how it used to be with the internet. And as that's progressed, those searches have gotten better and better. This is part of the skill that we have to learn is how do you put that prompt in there and how do you continue to follow up with it? What's different with Google is Google doesn't remember the first prompt you put in. Each time you search, it's a new one. But this continues to modify based on what you're asking.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, does it save information or once you clear it out, then is it done?
So some of the sites do save it and some do not, just depends on.
I mean, that could be good and bad.
Yes, exactly.
Right, and this is changing constantly. Like I just saw that the AI called Bard that Google was doing is no longer called Bard. It's got a whole new, what's that one? What's it called now? Do you remember? I forget what it has a whole new name, and because now it's taking ChatGPT and it's connecting it with the Alexa idea. So it's got these two things merged together, and Bard just came out 6 months ago, and now they're getting rid of it and redoing it. So I think we're going to constantly see those changes.
This would be, if you were doing a paper or something as you're speaking of, this would be like, even the way they do now, the teachers will learn how to do this, limit it down to direct the kids to say, they're not just typing in, give me examples of an environmental topic I could pick and get 50,000, because you could do that on Google and get 50,000. The teachers would have to learn the skills. To me, this seems like back when Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Maris and I, if you remember calculators, when calculators came out, that was really a big thing of not using it. Now kids, I mean, the PSSA, they answer the first 5 or 6 questions without, and then the rest of the test is. And also, I remember when I first came on the board, when we were going with iPads and stuff, and I remember Dr. Adams was still superintendent. Mr. Boberski was standing up there, and the question I asked was something about, okay, how are the teachers using these iPads? And his response was basically, at this point, they're using it to replace paper and pencil. Well, I could tell you from being in there over the last 6 years, that is entirely changed. Teachers have to have the training and things to use this, but they learn to adapt. And I do know, I don't want to give away the rest of the thing because I looked at the PowerPoint, but this to me would be a great tool because teachers can learn like they learn to use the iPads and computers to teach their lessons. They'll adapt with the right training, which we're going to have to provide for them.
I'm looking at this when you were talking, entering those questions, and I'm thinking of the hours I spent in the library. Because I had a social science history degree and took English classes, hours. I would have a stack of books. I had to learn how to look up in the table of contents or the index. I still had card catalogs. I mean, this is,
And running things through the microfiche projector.
I usually avoid topics like that.
Stone, yeah.
Not quite stone. My pen, I had to refill the cartridges. But what would take me maybe close to a daily for about a week, a daily to the library. This could be done for me to narrow down my topics because sometimes I would have a topic, but I couldn't actually find enough materials to write anything.
And so often students with research, they have a big idea, but they can't narrow it down enough. They have an idea that could be doctoral dissertation, and we're trying to get a 3 to 5 page paper out of this. So they have to get really
They
specific.
do.
And it's really hard, just so we started with environmental issues, then we moved to water. Now
Mhm.
we could ask a specific question about interstate water conflicts, which I've never thought about in my life, and now I could ask something much more specific about just that would actually narrow down that topic to be a topic that is a reasonable topic for a student to
And
write
it's
an
going
essay
to
on.
expand for them beyond the walls of our library. Because libraries are restricted by books and space. And what I was talking about, graduate school, going in the basement of a major university and stacks and stacks and stacks of books. So I had to filter through that, but you still have to teach that basic skill of how you filter through so you can narrow down and actually come up with enough topics. And when I taught high school, that was a key thing. Kids didn't know most of the kids didn't know how to do that. So they have all these grandiose ideas. So that's one thing that I see as a good thing. And maybe you're going to talk about this. I remember when we did virtual learning, and I speak for my grandchildren, because I was at the house quite a bit at their house. They couldn't figure out answers and sometimes, or how to do something, and their mother couldn't figure it out either. So she had to call the school to figure it out. So I'm assuming that they wouldn't have to go through that process anymore.
Well,
Hopefully.
Right. I mean, just like I was saying with my son with the physics problems, he asked ChatGPT how to break it down step by step for him. And so he did have that little virtual tutor
Well,
right
these
there
were
to work
elementary
through them.
school kids. too,
Absolutely,
so,
but
yeah.
it's the same kind of idea that they could see how they could give the 5 steps to this equation, to this problem, and break it down.
And then one of the things we do see in materials, or I do when I look, or maybe it's just what catches my eyes, is loneliness and not knowing how to socialize is a big issue. So I wouldn't want any of our students to depend so much on that they don't know how to have fun with friends at the lunch table, so to speak, or approach their teacher.
I think this is a tool, just like we talked about Google as a tool, not something that replaces the personal contact that's necessary in education.
Which would be really easy to do on those days when teaching isn't fun. It does happen. Yeah, so that, so that the teachers would just have them use that tool.
I think
There are
Dr.
so
Musser
many
found he
different
could not
prompts.
replace his assistant with a
Yeah,
virtual
yeah.
assistant. It didn't work.
Talking to myself all day long was not good.
I see some pluses, but I also am concerned about the ability to take away the learning process and work. Like we had to work a lot harder and making things too easy, like getting AI to make a video. Well, maybe you're going to learn more making that video yourself. So I see some pluses, but I also see some minuses. And, this whole thing with social media and our kids with phones now, we've seen it had a detrimental effect. I'm also worried about AI could have a detrimental effect too.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right, which is why we're having this presentation,
Right.
because we do want to be out in front of this. This is a tool. This isn't going away. This isn't something we're going to regulate out of the school systems. And you can see that the colleges early on tried to do that, and different schools and now have rescinded that policy and are starting to embrace this. At the end of the day, mowing your yard with a real mower takes a long time. I got a 60-inch zero turn now and I fly through my mower. I don't need to know what a real mower is.
Yeah.
So, we joke about the slide rule. This is all in how it's set up. And even some of these AI classrooms and platforms, some of them are teacher control, where they're operating in an AI classroom where the teacher's actually recording everything they're putting in and managing. So there's a lot of tools in place. It's like any tool. It can be used for good, and it can be used inappropriately. And that's what we need to be working with our staff. And we'll start to get on with our presentation, because be careful with this chat GPT. You can lose an hour or two of your life really fast.
Easily.
Well, an example with problems, if you have trouble solving a problem and you do this and it gives you the steps, did you really learn as much as if you figured it out yourself? So
Yes.
it can take away ability of a person to, they may not be able to really solve that problem. It's a different form later versus if they figured it out on their own. So I see advantages, but I see
You're right where you need to be.
Yep. I think all of 5 of us that went to the conference found as many pros as cons. And really, I think our goal is to find that balance, because the tool's not going away. So we can't pretend it's not here. So let's help to make good decisions and teach our staff and students how to use it in the right way and when to use it.
Well, I think of a student creating a video with AI and the other student doing themselves. And maybe the video with AI is better and they get a better grade. So I'm already thinking ahead, is this going to be fair? We're going to have to watch how it's used.
Not to belabor the point, but what's the purpose of the video? If the student was building the material and researching and doing it, and one used one form of production as opposed to another, they still got the same material. Now, if it's one of those things where it's actually the video generation, then yeah. And that's, again, it's all about how we're using it. You're 100% correct.
And with that idea, the rubric that the teacher designs is, if it's based on the content, not the final presentation, that's where the grade is going to be. Is the information accurate? Is it cited? Is it well researched? All of those pieces. So it doesn't matter what that end video looks like, but now you haven't spent 2 weeks teaching them how to edit an iMovie, and instead you're able to move on to additional content. So I think that judgment call for teachers and being able to decide when should they grapple through something, because we certainly want to teach our kids that resilience of working through something that is hard, but choosing when to do that as opposed to doing it all the time and then losing time on others.
Well, the other thing is, as everybody becomes more aware of this, including students sometimes will take the easy way out. And they don't necessarily tell you that you're using the artificial intelligence to do their work. How do you police that?
I would say as sweet and wonderful as teachers are, we're really cynics
I can't
about.
hear you, Mrs. Johnson.
I'm sorry, I lost my voice. As sweet and as wonderful as teachers are, we at our heart are cynics. We know if you were my students, I would know who did and who didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Well, That's true, but that video in the beginning, I thought that was a real woman talking, so.
Well.
And I didn't
you
even
needed-
pay
you
for the
should have put
upgraded
your
version.
Glasses on.
I,
You
I,
needed your glasses, Charles. That,
I think that
I know what you're
comment,
saying, I agree, but this is pretty good and you might be able to fool some teachers too.
Oh, they've done
Of course we
studies
will.
on that where it does fool teachers and the teachers say, oh, that kid wrote that. I know that kid. And it was AI or the opposite way.
and just, it's
Agree.
just, we're messy people. We don't get everything right. I agree with what you're saying. It's a tool that's not going away. And I could tell you different generations of tools that I've gone through because I am older than Mr. Donato. So we used to take AV classes, how to run projectors and, and make simple computer tests like, what is 1 + 1, and it was like, oh, I got it. I figured out how to do that. We've progressed so far, but we have to learn how to use these tools and to kind of ignore them as much as I don't want to use them. I'm glad I'm literally too old to have to learn. So,
well, I
yeah,
think that question about plagiarism segues perfectly into the next slide.
Because if we try to pretend it doesn't exist, that's when kids use it, or when we ban it completely, that's when we get pushback. But if we embrace it and think about projects where it can be used and sort of rethink what plagiarism is, then we get a more appropriate use of it. And certainly plagiarism is plagiarism, and there are things when students need to do the work on their own, and that's the bottom of this continuum. But Dr. Muster said he was working on that paper and his mom had already gone to bed, so she wasn't going to be able to proofread it. Is that plagiarism? Is that cheating by having his mom read a paper? How many of us have had a parent read a paper or have read one of our children's papers? What's the difference between that and putting the paper into ChatGPT and asking it to give me feedback? As soon as artificial intelligence is involved, lots of red flags go up, and now all of a sudden that student is cheating, but they're really not doing anything differently than coming to mom or dad and saying, can you read this paper for me and give me feedback? Now, when we get to the top, and that top one says the student plugged in the prompt and asked it to write a response, and they just copied and pasted it and turned it in, that's plagiarism. But by doing other pieces where we're using AI in a constructive way, that's a very different story.
It might be helpful, but look at this slide and every time it says AI, replace mom or dad.
And
And
then-
say,
oh, I'm sorry.
no, and I was gonna say, I mean, I think we all agree that the one at the top, whether it's AI or mom and dad, is
Correct.
cheating. And I think that probably the second one from the bottom, where you ask the internet or ask AI or mom and dad for advice, that's perfectly fine. That's educational. And then in the middle, there are some gray areas there. But those gray areas, to Mr. Hoffman's point, have always existed.
Right.
And I think that's where that equity part comes into it because not every kid has the access to the mom or dad after school. So if they don't have somebody to proofread their paper where neighboring student does,
Now they do.
now they do.
Or they don't fight with their mom and dad,
Correct.
which is wonderful.
It's much easier to accept AI's answer than mom.
Yeah.
So, these are not new questions, as Mr. Keener said, but as soon as it's something technological, people get scared. And so the point of this is to show that it's really nothing that we haven't dealt with in education for ages and ages. It's just a different form.
Or haven't dealt with in the history of the world,
Correct.
right? Like Johnny next door knows how to make fire. I don't yet. How's that fair? Because I still have to eat the raw fish and he doesn't. You know what I mean? Like, yes, like back to like old, back to the old days, right? I mean, or think about, we talk about calculators, right? I mean, like, it's the same thing, right? When calculators first came out, how did we monitor it? What did we use them for?
Right.
Some kids may have used it, some kids may not have. So 1 + 1, somebody goes ding, ding, ding. Oh, 2, right? Somebody else doesn't. They actually have to put the work out. It's exactly right, Mr. Hoffman. It's no different. It's just,
It's the
you better be ahead of the curve on this one.
Well,
it's
the
the teach-
ability to problem solve and handle difficult situations. I think of doctors and surgeons and nuclear power plant operators. If they don't know how to solve problems with their own head and they relied on GBT and AI a lot, they might not be as good at doing what the one that learned how to do it himself.
Or are they better because they've learned how to do things that no one else thought of before and they've actually put it into their own arsenal now? So, you know what I mean? Like, I guess at the end of the day, to the point that's been made 16 times, this ain't going anywhere. So either you better embrace it and own it, or you could turn your head and be like, I'm not going to touch it. And then now you're behind the curve.
So you
So-
guys are processing this right where you should be. This was us on day one. I was thinking about just leaving and going to Montana and just going off the grid. Like you're right where you need to be.
And a good educator is going to know, what is my goal? What do I want the kids to learn? And how can I get them to that point in an innovative way? And I just think of my own experience in the baking and pastry lab, where if my kids didn't need to spend a week learning how to put together their technology project to show all their work, that's another week they could have actually been learning different baking and pastry techniques in the kitchen with hands-on, and not spending a week researching, designing the cake, but actually more time preparing it and honing the physical skills. So I think it's just the design of education.
So I have a thinking back that I taught ELA students overseas. So one teacher was sure that it was plagiarized. So he just typed in different phrases to see if it actually came from the books that they were supposed to use. And lo and behold, there were, way too many of those phrases that she had put in her paper. So that was a plagiarized paper. So we've been talking about how students use it. In the reverse then, how can teachers use it to counterbalance probably the potential overuse of the AI that they have available to them?
And like we currently have a program called Turnitin that we use for our research papers to check for plagiarism. Most of our teachers require students to do that prior to it even being submitted to the teacher. And the main reason for that is it's a learning tool for the student of, oh, I forgot a citation. That is coming up as something that I plagiarized. And so I need to make sure that I put a citation there, or that section I thought was paraphrased correctly, but it's not paraphrased because it's too close to the original author's text. And so therefore I need to redo that section. And so they use it that way as a tool before it gets submitted. But Turnitin now has within it some AI detection, as do many of these kinds of tools. There's some question about how accurate they are. In fact, some of our higher level students will get flagged as being something that is AI when it's not AI. It's just they're that good. So, it's really a tool, again, that I think is going to just constantly change. So the next slide is really just a blurb from our grading guidelines that we already use. And we added just a section in there to make sure that if a student is using artificial intelligence, when it is a red stoplight assignment, when you're not allowed to use it, that it's clear that that would be treated the same way that we treat plagiarism.
Now, we've been talking about plagiarism, but to go back to what Charles is talking about in terms of science, mathematics, general problem solving, I don't necessarily consider writing a paper problem solving. So how would you check that? Their work that they do on projects like that?
Like if you're solving a math problem or an engineering problem, if
Or
they
a
use
science
AI
project,
versus
sure.
not, it'd be hard to check that.
It would be just like some of the plagiarism things don't work well. And that's where are the in-class assessment. Like, can you perform on the test in class where it is very clear that you're doing it on paper and pencil? Can you write your AP language and composition essay without any technology in front of you? So I think regardless of the subject, we're not going to go away from that, because that's truly will show that.
And then right now, they're also, I was reading something that talked about how a Princeton University student was developing some software algorithms, whatever the term is, to detect AI generated messaging in papers and content. That's the challenge. It's not totally reliable because all you gotta do is change a couple of words and bada bing, now it's undetectable. So I got to think, I mean, I mean, ChatGPT's only been out for what, a year, 14 months, 15 months?
Yep.
I mean, so they're going to continue working towards finding things that are actually going to detect this, no doubt. I would think. Just won't be me.
And if we can go back to the previous slide, this is not from policy 15. And at least not my quick look at it. And I guess my question was going to be, when was the last time this policy was reviewed? Because just skimming through this definition is problematic on a couple of levels.
So this is a policy. This is grading and reporting guidelines. It references in here technology use because anything that would be an issue with technology.
Oh, I
use is
see. Board
always
policy 15 refers only to
That last
responsible use of electronic resources.
Exactly. Only that last sentence.
Okay, so where is this from? Is this from a policy?
No, it is not from policy. It's from grading and reporting guidelines.
Okay.
It's not board policy at all.
'Cause
Yeah, I use ChatGPT to write it now. I heard that.
No, because I mean, as I look at this, there's two glaring issues with it. First, after the first sentence, there should be comma without proper attribution. As your own, comma, without proper attribution, right? And then further down, it says using AI to complete as part of an assignment will be treated as plagiarism. And we've already established that there are plenty of helpful benign uses for AI that you could use for part of the assignment.
Right, which is why it has the clause before that says unless it is part of the assignment. If it's yellow, as we showed in that stoplight, and they're allowed to use it, that's fine. But if it's a red assignment.
I don't want to get off the rails here, but I think we could do some wordsmithing in this in light of.
I think that sounds like a policy committee issue.
But it's not policy.
Yeah, but at some point, we're gonna have to be looking at some of this.
Well, when they bring a specific policy.
It's called
about
Arch.
AI, they would change that.
I'm just trying to move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
This is not.
Off the rails.
Yeah.
yeah.
Fingers never off the rails.
I'm just trying to make this.
It's one of those toddler ones.
So the next couple of slides we have here, I'm just going to focus a little bit on what we've been doing so far with professional development. As you've heard here, and I think over the last year and a half, AI has really taken off, but the reality is AI has been around for quite a while. So you think about some of the things that your phone and Siri and those types of things have done for us at a lower level, and now you're really starting to see AI and machine learning really start to take off and have a much larger conversation to it. So as many of you said, part of this is being out in front of it, starting to have some conversations with teachers and training with them and giving them some time to, just as you wanted to here tonight, get in and play around and see what the capabilities are and some possibilities of use, as you saw with some of Kathy's slides there as well. So some of the things we focus on here is obviously what is it? So starting from the basics, we have some that have played around with it and have an idea of what it is, and we have others that haven't tested it out yet, don't really know what it is or how it works. How does it work? And this is from basic machine learning to, as some of you said, and I'll get down to it here a little bit later, but kind of training that chat GPT or that chat bot a little bit on how to get the information that I need or want out of it. One of the things that you guys were just talking about as well is identifying work that is AI generated. So how do I start to identify work that is AI generated as a teacher? And there are some key things in a lot of the chatbots and a lot of the return information that you get. A lot of times it will start with the same type of sentence structure. It will start with certain words and certain paragraphs. So those are some of the things that we teach our teachers to look for. And someone said it here earlier too, knowing your students is a big part of it. So getting an idea of how your students write and those types of things really help in identifying work that is generated through AI. Another piece too, and it's been touched on a little bit here tonight, is AI site review. So, and authenticity of that information that you get. So we know there's bias in AI. We know we need to make sure we take a look and see and be sure that the different AI sites that are out there are doing what we want them to, and being able to identify some of those issues. You saw a little bit on the slides earlier. How can or could it be used by teachers and students? You saw that stoplight analogy there from an assignment standpoint. And you'll see a couple slides here later on. I think Doug has a couple on different ways that it can be used by teachers and by students. And we're just scratching the surface here. I mean, this is really starting to take off with a lot of different sites, and you can start to recognize the possibilities that we can use for education. I do think this will be as Kathy mentioned earlier, when the internet came out, that was a big deal. And then we had the Web 2.0, all those different toolkits and stuff that we could use. I think this is going to be another one of those, important pieces that we need to get out in front and make sure we find the appropriate uses for our staff and our students. Next couple things down there is advanced learning and keeping the integrity of it. So being able to make sure we advance learning and make sure we still have the integrity of learning there, and being able to identify some of those areas. Another piece that we didn't touch on too much here is the privacy and confidentiality. So that's something that we touch on with teachers as well. So that's an important part that we need to consider when we're using these sites, because a lot of these sites, not all of them, but some of these sites do learn, and they are collecting that information. So we want to be sure that we're not putting, private information into the prompts that we are using. We want to make sure that we keep that information confidential, not including specific student names, those types of things, in the different chat bots and GPT and sites that we're using. You talked a little bit earlier about that machine learning and the official term for some of the stuff that we were doing with refining our searches, so to speak. That's how we used to do it with Google. And now, as you start to enhance those prompts, it's actually prompt engineering. That's the term that you're going to start hearing. So how can I structure my prompts to get a better response or a better outcome of what I'm looking for? So those are some of the focus areas that we've been working on with teachers as we've had professional development throughout this year. My next slide here just kind of outlines some of the times that we've had some professional learning on these topics this year. So on September 23rd, we had an in-service day where we had a bunch of different menu options that teachers could select from. I think we had 4 or 5 different sessions during that time that were AI related. Some were taught by instructional technology, and some were actually teachers in the classroom as well that had some experience with it. Coming up on March 8th, we have another one of those days with a lot of those different menu items. And again, we have about 4 or 5 different sessions being offered there. Those sessions are definitely one of the more attended sessions, or sessions that teachers want to get into and learn more about. So it's one of the more popular ones that we've had on those days thus far. And I anticipate that continuing down the road. Number 2 there is just some other alternate in-service opportunities that we provide for staff. So we do have some after-school sessions, typically an hour-and-a-half session after school, and we do have some of those over the summer as well. So we just recently re-upped on a few of those here in the upcoming months for those that still need alternate in-service time to complete throughout this school year. The bottom part there is just some of the titles that we had throughout some of those in-service sessions that were offered.
So just a general question. ChatGPT is one form of AI.
Oh,
There's multiple, right?
Oh, limitless.
So are they, what are they? Are they software programs, or how do they work
Yeah, so
without getting into the weeds?
yeah, it's essentially a chat bot that's developed that has a bunch of different algorithms out there. that's basically combing through all of the information online on the internet. Right now, the systems typically go to the year 2022. The paid versions go to the most current information that's out there on the internet as well. So yeah, there's, as you mentioned, they are growing like crazy. I can't tell you how many different programs have been AI generated over the last year and a half. But for instance, we're starting to see it in all the different software areas that we use. So as you start to think of our student information system, they are starting to build an AI component inside there as well. Last week, I just sat in on kind of a yearly meeting that we have on our filtering software. They are in the process of building an AI session for students inside the filtering software as well. So when you start to think about that and how that might work, again, somebody mentioned here earlier, some of the sites don't allow you to just ask the question and get the full answer. They start to guide you in your thinking and make you start to do some of the critical thinking to get the final answer. The filtering site that I'm mentioning is just that. It doesn't allow them to just ask the question and get the answer to it. It kind of guides them through their learning.
So
The other piece that we asked them during that time was, you know, as students are using some of these sites, as you said, they can be used good and bad. So what are our chances of, you know, if there was a concerning item that was put into a chat bot, we would be able to get notified on that. So you think about some of the, you know, potential suicides and stuff
It's
like
like
that.
putting something in the internet.
Yeah.
Google.
So.
So Tab, when you made that video, did it give you the option to say, hey, I want to make a video and who do I want to use? And there's multiple characters.
So you know how cheap I am. So that's the free version and you get whatever they get and you get a limited number of characters, but there's 3 or 4 different levels where they add different people. You can control them, locations, dress, everything. And when it's on a fast internet connection in front of you, their lips match up perfectly. Like it is amazing.
So do you just put in, I want to make a video and then they ask you, who do you want to be the characters or?
There's a bunch of different programs. Yeah, basically. And you can use ChatGPT to find all those things too. So, and again, I do want to be sensitive with the time, but I also want to make sure you guys have opportunities to play with this. So if you get a chance, throw me an email. I'll run you through a couple of some basic tools, enough that'll start you down the path. Just don't blame me later if you get lost on that path.
So moving through just some of the next steps and what this means for us, what we're thinking about. I mean, obviously, this is almost a self-evident statement, you know, we strive to have those rich, relevant, and authentic experiences in our schools. And with the advent of AI, this becomes a challenge, right? What do authentic experiences look like now if I can't tell if that person on the screen is a real person or an AI bot, right? What are those rich and relevant experiences that we can put in front of students? Yes, the dangers are there, but the conversation now, and it will transform education. The conversation for us now is what is the task at hand? What are the learning intentions and how are we promoting critical thinking, knowing those tools are there? That's what our goal is. That's what we're working with our staff on going forward. The next slide just talks a little bit about from the World Economic Forum, you know, what are those jobs that are fastest growing, that are in demand? You can see number 1 on the list right there is AI and that machine learning specialist. A lot of the jobs, though, on the left are analysts and engineers and jobs that promote that critical thinking. That's so important for us to be developing in our students versus some of the other jobs, which can be replaced by AI or someone that can, a machine that can do repetitive tasks pretty regularly. This slide, I think we got from the slide deck at the conference and is probably the one that most of us resonated, we're drawn to the most. If our primary concern is just about the plagiarism and the cheating, we're not thinking about AI in the right direction, right? We need to shift our thinking about how can we use AI with our students responsibly and help them to maintain their academic integrity, right? If we can keep that in mind, then we're rowing in the right direction when we're designing our activities for schools and for our classrooms and for our students. The next two here, just talk about some of the leaders in the industry from Microsoft, from the global leaders about those new skills that are important to them, what they want to see in their graduates. So right in the middle of the slide there, analytical judgment, flexibility, emotional intelligence are the traits that they're looking for in our students. And it's followed up on the next slide with a couple extra at the bottom there. When you're looking at the intellectual curiosity, bias detection handling, and AI delegation. All of those things are skills that we can teach using AI. We can say, yes, recognize that the dangers are there, recognize you can use it for the wrong purposes, but you can also use it to teach that intellectual curiosity, to show them lessons where they can look for the bias, right? So I'll give you a quick example that they took us through at the workshop. The one day he starts out and says, all right, I'm throwing in ChatGPT. Who is the world's #1 goal scorer for European soccer or European football? And it come up on the screen. It's Ronaldo. And he said, by the way, my information's from 2022, might be a little old, that might have been surpassed, but Ronaldo is by far the #1 goal scorer. And then his follow-up question was, well, tell me who the #1 female goal scorer in European football is and how many goals have they scored? And they scored at least double what Ronaldo has. So in the implication of that question was the machine, the AI, was expecting an answer coming back for a male popular athlete, because what it's doing is it's distilling all the information that's out on the internet. There are thousands more articles out there about Ronaldo and about male football players than there are about female football players, regardless if the specificity of the question was really looking for which human, male, female, has the most goals scored. It was giving me a biased answer. So if we use those kind of activities in the classroom and show the students, what to be looking for when you are using these tools, what to be aware of and how you're thinking critically, you're really bringing out those skills that you want in our students. And to kind of close here, wrap up some of the things that we're looking at. Policy, we're still a little young and early on policy development. We're certainly ChatGPT, he's, as Mr. Wagner said, 15 months old or so. AI has been around for a while. It's a slow creep, from things like spell check and auto address complete in our email clients and things like that, to now what we're seeing really more in the past year of a classification of generative AI, which is generating text, generating videos, generating images, really producing visuals for us. That has really caused an explosion of tools out there on the internet. You've seen just a couple tonight, but throughout 3 days, we saw hundreds of them that are just fascinating, each with kind of their own little niche. So, we're continuing to make sure that we're monitoring and trying to think through what's important for us to be in front of. We do want to make sure that we are providing guidance for our staff and students. Jeremy talked about a lot of the things that we're thinking about in our professional development, thinking about privacy, thinking about safety, thinking about bias and all those kind of things. Making sure that we are looking at copyright and making sure that all of our policies are kind of aligned. So really where we're at right now is just looking for some good, strong, basic guidance at the policy level, and then work it into our professional development. This will continue to evolve. We're going to have to be flexible, whatever we're doing, because I am sure that what we're talking about today is going to be different, 6 months from now, a year from now. So we'll continue that route. Last two slides here, just talk about challenges and opportunities, and not to give away the big reveal, but I think Mr. Wagner already alluded to a little bit here. I will tell you that the 10 challenges and the 10 opportunities on the next slide came straight from ChatGPT, right? We wanted to use the tools a little bit with this presentation. Dr. Musser started it with our little video assistant there. We wanted to close it out and end it with, just some examples of what those tools, how those tools are being used in the professional world. We were at a curriculum coordinators meeting this morning where we were doing a little professional development at the end, and the prompts that we were using to guide our small group discussion came right from ChatGPT. That's not uncommon at all in our worlds now.
You'll run into it professionally more and more as we go forward. We were snickering a little bit. A professional organization earlier this year put out a new policy statement, and at the someone got fired, I'm sure, because at the top of their header, the ChatGPT text that they used to help write that email was forgotten to take out of it, and was professionally sent out to the entire organization. An hour later, the same email came out without that header text. So it's being used everywhere and for multitudes of purposes. We cannot sit here and deny our students the use of these tools. We have to be responsible in showing them how to use those the appropriate way. I'm not going to go too much more into any other examples. Like Dr. Muster said, we'd be happy to share some of these tools with you and play with them. We have several credits here. The resources from the slide. AJ Giuliani is a phenomenal speaker, puts out a lot of resources. His workshop resources for us are linked there. The Synthesia, I believe that's how you pronounce it, is that little AI bot from the beginning of this presentation.
You all can make one free video. After that, you have to pay.
Dr. Muster showed you a little over a minute of that TED Talk from Sal Khan. He's the guy from Khan Academy, you may be familiar with. And he is really dabbling in the AI world with Khan Amigo, is one of the tools that he's very involved with currently. But that full TED Talk is about 15 minutes, a really good watch if you wanted to dive in a little bit more. Link there for ChatGPT. We use that on the presentation as well. We covered a lot of ground and just scratched the surface. But any other concluding questions you might have that we can try and wrap things up and give you some takeaways tonight?
Just one quick one. If you click on that link for ChatGPT, you'll have to sign up, right?
Right. So
it's not like Google where you just Google something, type it in, hit enter. Right.
You can link it. You can link it right to your Google account and just say, I'm signing in with my Google credentials. And then all of a sudden you're in, and next time it knows it's you. It is one of the things, and we didn't talk too much about this, that we are concerned about and talking to staff about, but I'm sure they're talking with students also. The amount of information that's going into these tools is concerning, right? You could write whole legal documents there, with AI tools here, which are probably more professionally well written than something that some of us could come up with. But the say you were going to write an IEP, right, with an AI tool, you feed in a student's name, it's now sucked into the infrastructure of that AI and is out there for whatever purposes that they're going to share it with. So we have to be really careful. While it's important for us to have good prompts and to be asking the right questions, and really that some of the things that Mr. Paul was talking about are a skill that we're learning. We have to be careful about the information that's going in as well, so that we are not compromising some of the information that we're at duty to protect.
It's kind of like an advanced Google, right? I mean, just takes a little further, because when we got Google and stuff we could search, you could do the same kind of thing. It just won't be quite as elaborate. Is that kind of a correct statement?
I would say Google on steroids and then some.
Yeah.
I mean, and the difference with AI is that the AI, there's so many niche AIs that do so many different things that are targeted, where Google's more of a general application. I would say like ChatGPT and Google are a little bit closer, but I really do encourage come an hour early before a board meeting, or stop in the morning or after work. I'd love to show you a couple of these tools and how they work. I think that's where you're really like, I can really see this application for kids just in this venue. You can see a little bit of time we spent now and where we're at. But there's just so much here, as Dr. Danich discussed.
I don't have a lot to add, except that I think it's important for us to understand what the next step of this is. And what I mean by that is there's free versions out there. And so is the plan, what is the ultimate goal with the use of AI as it relates to education? And I would ask that you have a strategic plan around how that's going to look. And part of the reason I would ask that is because it does have implications that might go deeper than just a free version. So I don't know if those discussions are premature, but I would just ask that you think about that as you look to step into this world.
Yeah, this presentation is part of that, but we have been working on that in the background. We have a document started where we're pulling together a lot of those resources because it's important that we're in front of this, like Dr. Musser said. It's definitely going to change our world of education quite dramatically.
Anything else? Okay, let's move to the next section, section. But before you show us the slides, I want to share with you what the committee has been doing in addition to Judy as well. All four of us, and it's myself, Richard, Pat, and Megan, are the official committee members, and we have been visiting schools, elementary schools that Doug has arranged for us, along with Jason, to go to all of the elementary schools and visit, if not all, nearly all of the classes that are piloting. Savas, or My View, My Perspectives, and Wit and Wisdom. We've spent maybe 20 minutes in the classes, around 20 minutes in each class, plus or minus, depending on what the students were doing when we went in. When they did their group discussions or their interactive activities, we would do that with them. We were sitting on the floor with them or reading with them, whatever activity that was. And Jason and Doug were also doing that as well. In one case, the principal walked around with us. We had opportunity to have lunch with two of the principals plus us and have a good discussion about what was going on in the classrooms. The principals are very involved in what's going on. In fact, we are going to have a meeting with the principals so we can get their feedback, not just the teachers, but the principals' feedback soon. So I just wanted to highlight what we have been doing. We probably spent, I don't know, I figure about 85 different classes that we've been to at different times between all of us. And I just want to say, I really appreciate the time that you've taken to set up that schedule for us. And then the teachers, it can be kind of nerve-wracking to have, and Mr. Bruminski went with us one day too. It can be nerve-wracking to have board members and the supervisors and the superintendent come into the classrooms, and the kids are like, who are all these adults surrounding us? But they were very good and very receptive. And we got a few minutes after each class, in most cases, to speak with the teacher. Sometimes they didn't have time because they had to go to the next class. But in some cases, the classes were leaving and going to some special. And so we had a little bit extra time with them. Teachers that we haven't been able to, and then we had a group meeting last week with, it started at 4:30, so it was after school, and teachers came. They were around
45
teachers who came, including a few reading specialists. And we had the table set up. So this room had a bunch of tables at it, and at every table, there were some teachers from both pilot programs. This was volunteer for them to come. It's extra time for them. The hook was pizza. So did feed them dinner. And then we all sat, did you sit at tables at it? All the committee members, Mike, Doug, and Jason sat at each table and maybe prompted some of the discussion, but these teachers were not shy about discussing what they saw with the pros and the cons with both of these programs, which I really appreciated them doing that for us. After we had that the discussion at each table, the committee members, and I can't remember if it was just the committee members or what, we got to stand up and ask questions of the whole group. And we did a couple of rounds of that. Also when we had the table discussions, a scribe was appointed, And I have in my email somewhere all the notes that the teachers were taking. One observation I made, I didn't go to that many classrooms. Megan and Judy did most of the visits. What really surprised me was when we started discussing, and this was true of Richard and Pat too, we all had the same impression, generally speaking, of what the pros and the cons were for each program. And I really didn't expect us to align that much. The difference is when we get down into the details and the particulars, which I think once we are compile all that information, talking about research, I do not have a GPT or whatever. I don't have anybody to feed that information to except for us. We're going to come back with the details. And I think that those details will help us give us a better picture of seeing what's going on in the classroom, what the pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses are of each one of the curriculums that are being piloted. And it's going to be on our observations, based on our observations and the teachers' observation as well. And then we will also have input from the principals. So just wanted you to know we're really spending a lot of time and taking this very seriously because it's really important and there are strengths to both programs. And we are going to continue to examine and come up with a good recommendations or at least good information for you. The teachers who were not able to attend were encouraged to write us emails, and they have. And I also got a detailed email from one of our principals because she gave us a general overview of plus and minuses when we were having lunch together. And I asked her to write it up for me, and would she write that and send it to the committee, and she did. And I just can't express how professional these teachers have acted and been, whether they love one program or not, whether they prefer this program or that program. They have really been very professional about how they have been piloting this program, how they have been just really, I was really impressed with that. One teacher I went into, it was a kindergarten teacher, and I didn't realize that it was the all-day class. And I was like, oh, these kids are so good. I'm so impressed. And then I found out they were the kids who needed to be in all-day kindergarten. And I was able to tell the teacher that then during the meeting, she was like, I can't believe you said that. I'm so excited. So, but I walked away thinking, I trust these teachers with my children, regardless of what program we do. I trust these teachers with my children. And that for me in many ways is the bottom line, because both programs are good. They're both professional. Some of them use the science of reading. Some of them don't. Some of them had good spelling. Some of them don't. But the bottom line is, I just really feel like we can trust these teachers to do a good job for us, even if they didn't pilot. It's a long haul and it's hard. Anytime you try a new curriculum or you use a new curriculum, it's a lot of work. It's an awful lot of work, and it's work in addition to all the professional development they do and also teaching their classes that they teach every day. And elementary teachers have a lot more to do. When I taught high school, I just had 2 classes I had to prep for. And elementary teachers do a lot more than that. So we will be bringing you more information during the next meeting. And if you want to see any of that ahead of time or have any of those charts, I can email those to you once we get that put together. So thank you. And now we've got hard data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am very appreciative of all the board members that have been able to come into the classrooms. We have heard repeatedly from teachers of how much that they have appreciated your investment in this process. So thank you for that. So as Mrs. Johnson said, tonight we're here to talk numbers, with summary of 2 years worth of data from our ELA pilot. I will warn you on the front end, there are lots of numbers here. So some of you are excited about that. I know some of you, we'll do our best to get you through it. But it was a lot of hard work to pull this together. We intentionally made the decision not to go through this and try and highlight best scores for programs and tell the story for you. We'd rather you tell the story or see what you're getting out of this. So this is one of the few times where we've printed the presentation for all of you, have it in front of you. There are opportunities throughout to take notes on the side of the paper as you see things, questions that you might have about the data or observations that you might have. So that was an intentional design here for you this evening. We will wrap it up and try and make some sense of it at the evening, at the end of the presentation. But we were trying to do that intentionally. If on the first slide here, you're going to see the data sources that we've used, and you're going to hear these throughout the presentation. So the first couple bullets there are 22, 23. So we were able to pull together the end of year data for PSSA, for ExactPath, and for Acadience. Those are the three main data sources that we use for benchmarking student growth. Whether at the state level or at the district level. So we have those results compiled together. We also have PVAS data. PVAS comes from projections that the state make using PSSA data about where they expect students to score on the upcoming PSSA tests. And then we have some data here showing, whether they hit those targets or fell short. And then we move into the data that we've collected this year. So the 23-24 data, and that is primarily from September through January. So comparing beginning of the year metrics to mid-year metrics. When we are comparing the ExactPath and Acadience data, what we did is we compared last year's mid-year results to this year's mid-year results. So we had, kind of equal sample sizes of data. We then, as we've talked about administered writing prompts this year, cold read writing prompts. A couple of you got the opportunity to join us and help score those. They're all blind scored, not knowing who the students are or which pilot they came from, using the state's rubric. So we have a beginning of the year writing score and a mid-year writing score. We'll have some data on that to share. And one of the questions, wonderings that I've been hearing over the past couple months from many of you as we've had conversations is which of these programs is better for my top learners or for my strong students, and which one of these programs is better for our fragile learners or those that need more support. So I tried to share a little bit of that in data. So the last couple slides, we have some benchmarking comparisons, and when we get to those slides, I'll kind of talk you through those and share how we tried to answer that question with data. Some notes. I have to say this on the front end. You've heard this from me multiple times. This is not a statistically valid study. There's a lot of variance in the sample size. This is a volunteer pilot. We have variance in the student profiles in each pilot. We have variance in the teacher profiles in each pilot. There's a lot of noise in the data there. We are going to try and pull some trends out of here, and you'll get some information and look at student growth. But it is not an apples to apples. This data was used to compare this program, and therefore is definitely the direction to go. So it's just important for us to understand that this data is not tied directly and speaking solely on that ELA program in the classroom. The PSA, Acadience, ExactPath are not intended to measure ELA program strengths and weaknesses. It is intended to measure student growth. And there's a lot of things that go into student growth, whether their basic needs are being met or, whether they experience any trauma that they're bringing into the classroom or, transiency that they may have. Like I said, this data is not solely about the ELA program. We'll use it to try and tell the story here today, but it is not the only thing it's here for. There are a couple data points that are based on some very small sample sizes, so be aware of that going in. When we look at the ExactPath data, our kindergarten students do not take the ExactPath assessment in the beginning of the year. So you will only see that in 1st through 6th grade. And then our EDK students, as Mrs. Johnson was saying, our full day kindergarten students, EDK students are identified because they struggle with some early literacy skills. So we'd expect to have some lower scores there. So the kindergarten scores, it do include the EDK students, which were in the Wit and Wisdom pilot. So those are just some general notes about the data.
So Doug,
as we kick in here.
I understand it may not be statistically significant, but we're probably going to see some trends and we're going to know more than we did last year, correct?
You got it.
Okay.
Yep. We'll try and make sense of it by the end.
So just for clarity, the EDK students are only seeing the Wit and Wisdom pilot. There are no Savas students in that pilot.
Correct. There's the 2 classrooms that we have in EDK have Wit and Wisdom. We do have 2 kindergarten classrooms that are not EDK that are in Savas. Yes. Okay.
So you would expect that a full day, and if I'm stating this correctly, an extended day kindergarten would show increased learning naturally just because they have more educational time. Is that an accurate statement or no?
Yes and no. Yes, I do think the more time definitely helps and will
Okay.
show the growth. I would say those students are in that class because they start at a lower achievement point. They are chosen because of their early literacy skills. So they start lower, but they do have more time in program. Yes.
That's fair. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so the next 2 slides just give you an idea of sample sizes compared this year versus last year. So last year we had 42 teachers piloting overall. This year we have 96. So this is something we've talked about, that we've, basically doubled the number of teachers who are piloting, which also on the next slide means that we have a much larger number of students who are involved in these pilot classrooms as well. And this year, it honestly works out to be about a third, a third, and a third. A third doing the current curriculum, a third using Savas, and a third using Wit and Wisdom. On the next slide, kind of a summary. In most cases, what you'll see as we go through this, there's not like one glaring piece that's going to jump out to you. There are some, as we go on each slide, you'll notice some differences from one program to the next, but not a consistent trend that can be drawn from the data. So that's one of the reasons that we have you making some notes as you go through. And in the end, we'll give you a summary of some of the points that we see as we look at all of the data points. But just to be aware that as we looked at this, there's not one consistent trend that jumps out.
Mr. Hoffman, quick question, maybe irrelevant, maybe stupid, not to belabor this, but I don't know if I've ever asked this before. Pure curiosity. Do you know or have an idea of why as many teachers this time around would have jumped in as opposed to last year? We've more than doubled that. It's on a voluntary basis. It's optional. And yet we've more than doubled the number of teachers that wanted to be a part of this. What's the reason for that? And why did they choose the program that they wanted to choose?
Yeah, so I can speak just from what teachers shared with me when we were going through this process, and that is that they are at the point where they need a program. That we've used the reading workshop model. They know that research is saying that that is not the most effective way to teach reading. And they felt that they were going to get a program for this year. That didn't happen. And so when that didn't happen, when there was an opportunity to expand the pilot and have more teachers join, most of them decided to join. There were actually many teachers that we turned away from piloting because of a desire to keep the numbers balanced and to have a group piloting Savas, a group piloting Wit Wisdom, and a group who were continuing to use the current curriculum. So we actually had more people volunteer to pilot than we were able to accommodate.
Did you?
Because I've gone around one time with Mrs. Eshelman, Mr. Garber, and Mrs. Brady to see this, but I've been around many times with Mr. Hoffman and Dr. Danbridge to see these programs, and what he's saying is a consistent theme. And one thing I've heard teachers say they love Savas or they love Wit and Wisdom, but a lot of teachers say we just want a choice made at this point. And they and they've said we really love Savas, but if Wit and Wisdom chose it, we're okay with that. And the other ways that we really love Wit and Wisdom, but they want a program more than anything else with it from that. And agree 100% because I even saw this last year with the smaller group. They really work hard with this. And whatever program is chosen for, they're going to have to work. Basically 2/3 of the teachers are going to have to work really hard the second time because they're not going to have that program. It's going to take a lot of in-service training for them. It's going to take a lot of work again with it. It's going to be harder for them than for being an elementary teacher to do that than even adjusting to the new math curriculum that we put in past year.
And that last point is really important. To your point, Mr. Wagner, it's all volunteer. So the teachers went into this pilot knowing that they had a 50-50 chance that the program they were volunteering to pilot may not be the one that was selected, knowing that there was a chance they were going to do 2 years in a row of work with a new program, which is not easy.
But to that point, the teachers were very savvy in that if more of them volunteered, half of them are going to get the program that they will ultimately be adapted. Half will not, half will. So I commend the teachers for their foresight and saying, I'm going to roll the dice and have a 50-50 shot of getting my program.
Oh, the other thing too, because we purchased things they have, even whichever one's picked, they're still going to have the materials for the other program. It's not disappearing as supplemental things that they could possibly use if needed.
So first data slide that you have here is the end of year PSSA data. So you've seen some of this before. There are 3 charts in front of you. I'm not going to spend tons of time, but certainly feel free to write any observations or questions that you have down here. The top chart is the students' the average grade level scaled score or achievement score for those students, broken down by grade level and by program there. And you also have the district average in gray. The second table that you will see is the TDA or the text dependent analysis. That is the writing score or the writing prompt that is given in the PSSA test. There is no writing prompt in 3rd grade. But 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, that score is out of 16 points. It is based on a rubric. 1, 2, 3, or 4 points can be scored, and then it is just multiplied by 4 there. So a 16 would be a 4 out of 4, 12 is a 3 out of a 4, 8's a 2 out of 4, and a 4 is a 1 out of 4. So you can see the scores there. One of the things that we did notice and was a great celebration for us in our TDA writing scores, if you remember the previous year, we told you writing is a concern for us. Our average district score was a 7.86, less than a 2 on that rubric. We gained over a point this past year. So that our average writing score was closer to a 9 this past year on the PSSA test, which is fantastic. We were really excited about that. And then on the bottom there, you have broken down the percent of students proficient or advanced versus students who were non-proficient in each of the grade levels and each of the programs. On the summary charts on the right-hand side, you do see the district 2022 averages versus the 2023 averages. And there we're happy in grades 4, 5, and 6, all the proficiency rates grew in all 3 of those grade levels, which is great. Slightly down in 3rd, but 4th through 6th were all increases. So that's the end of year PSSA data. That's the culmination of year 1 of the pilot. One reflection of note, just to be aware of, scaled scores don't tell the story, right? Because scaled scores, you could have stronger students in one pilot than the other. You could have weaker students in one pilot versus the other. So just giving their achievement scores doesn't necessarily tell you a story, which is why we will be looking at growth and the other metrics as we go through this.
I thought we controlled for that.
I'm sorry?
I thought last spring we talked about controlling for that and making sure that the pilot groups the students were evenly distributed by ability.
No, we were not. First of all, this was based on the first year of the pilot. right? So this is end of the year data from the
This is last
first
year,
year.
right?
Right. And we couldn't control too much for that even going into the second year of the pilot. While we could get even numbers, you're still going to have different populations of students. And that wasn't something that we controlled for when we did the class sizes.
So the next slide looks at our end of year exact path data. So again, you can see the average of final growth. So that first line shows you from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. The middle line looks at the average of growth in the first half of the year. That's what we had to share last year at this point in time. And then the average of growth in the second half of the year. So you can see that across all three groups. For both beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year. Next slide does the same thing with Acadience. Again, you can see what it looks like from the beginning of the year to the end of the year in that first line, which is the average of final growth. Then what it looked like from beginning of the year to middle of the year, average of the first half, and then from the middle of the year to the end of the year.
So what is what's exact path and what's Acadience?
Exact path is a computer adaptive test that the students take 3 times a year. So it is testing reading readiness skills, academic growth in the areas of reading. Acadience is an individual, for the most part, test that is given to students one-on-one, where they are reading passages, sounding out words, giving the sounds in words, looking at some comprehension pieces as well as fluency pieces as well.
Okay, thank you.
So as Dr. Dandridge said, neither of those assessments were ever designed to evaluate an ELA program. We were kind of looking at them to see what they would tell us about student growth. So Exact Path is a diagnostic assessment. The one important thing about that is because it is computer adaptive, not all the students receive the same set of questions. So if I answer a reading question correctly and Dr. Dandridge answers it incorrectly, our next questions will be very different. So it does move students through a set of questions, but not all students have the same questions. Acadience is a timed assessment. So while all students have the same passages, they have the same set of words that they are reading, or the same set of comprehension questions that they're answering, or words that they're filling into sentences for comprehension, it's timed. So I may only get to 100 words in the passage and Dr. Dandridge might get to 150. So while it's the same set of words, same set of passages, different students get to a different number of them because each one is probed for 1 minute of time.
And then the last metric that we have that is just on year 1 of the pilot, end of the year data, is our PVAS scores. So those come in the fall. So what PVAS does is students get a projection, how the state thinks they will score on the upcoming PSSA assessment. And then once they take it, we can assess, how what their actual scores look like and how accurate they were to that projection. So what you see on this chart is the difference from the projection, how close or how far they were from their projected score and the averages per each pilot. The difference between the actual and the projected score are pretty close, should be around 0. So, those projections were pretty accurate. But it does show that students' growth was above what was expected for the most part on this chart. So that's one of the growth metrics that we can get from the state that we look at when we are pulling our state assessment data in the fall. The one note on there in particular is that 5th grade, and you saw a couple of the lower scores there on the 5th grade chart. We continue to see a dip in our 5th grade growth scores. We talked about that a little bit when did the data presentation in the fall. Continues to be an area, regardless of program, that we are trying to turn our attention towards.
So the next two slides have lots of numbers on them. So on this slide, this looks at this year's exact path data. So that's the computer adaptive test. You'll see at the top in the 22-23 3 lines, that is showing the growth last year. The 3 lines at the bottom show the growth this year. If a box is shaded green, that means that grade level in that curriculum area had the highest or higher growth between the 2 years. So the positive is that there's a lot of green on the bottom there, meaning that this year we're seeing more growth than we did last year. Again, you'll see the Hempfield year with the H, the Savas with the S, and the Witten Wisdom with the W.
Forget it. I see 5 on Hempfield, I see 4.
Yeah. The one thing to keep in mind with this is as you're comparing the top 3 lines to the bottom 3 lines, those are different groups of students. So last year's first graders are a totally different group of kids than this year's first graders. Last year's first graders become this year's second graders. The next chart does the same thing for Acadians. Now again, looking at the growth from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year for Hempfield, Savas, Witten Wisdom last year, and then 3 rows at the bottom, the same thing for this year. Now, the next slide shows the writing prompts. These were administered at the beginning of this year and then again in January. So grade 3's writing prompt is slightly different. Theirs is only scored based upon reading comprehension. So the student's writing is not scored based upon conventions. So nothing for spelling, grammar, writing style at all. It's just on whether they can respond to a piece of text. It's worth 3 points. In grades 4, 5, and 6, it's a TDA, text-dependent analysis response. That is scored both for reading comprehension elements as well as writing elements as well, and it's out of 4. So you can see the average score that's listed there is the score from that grade level of students in that curriculum, either Hempfield curriculum, Savas program, or Witten Wisdom, and then the amount of growth that showed from the beginning of the year. So the average score is either out of 3 or 4, and then the growth from the beginning of the year shows the growth and average score from September to January.
All right, I really want to take a moment with this next 2 slides to talk about this benchmark data. So this was that attempt to try and answer that question about, strong learners, fragile learners, and then how are they responding to the program. So what you have here, 2 different charts. Exact Path gives a benchmark score for all students. Those benchmarks are based on their grade level proficiency, and a student can either be exceeding that grade level proficiency, meeting it, approaching it, or below. Okay, so we have 2 that are above, 2 that are below. What we did is we took those benchmark scores from the beginning of the year assessment, the diagnostic. The top chart is only showing you students who at the beginning of the year were meeting or exceeding the grade level proficiency. Those are our stronger students at the beginning of the year, right? And what it did is we looked and said mid-year, did they stay at that same meeting and exceeding level, or did they slide? So you see, close to, between 86 and 90% of the students who started the year strong, stayed meeting or exceeding the grade level proficiency. And then we had, around 10%, 9 to 13% there of students who might have slid to approaching or below. It could have been students who were just over the meeting grade level proficiency and just slid back, or it could be ones that took a larger step back. But for the majority of the students, strong students staying strong in all 3 really categories, but slightly stronger scores in the pilot programs there. The bottom chart does the opposite. So it takes the students who are more fragile learners, so the ones that were below grade level proficiency, either approaching or below, and then how did they do? So 24% of them actually grew enough that they were now meeting or exceeding the grade level proficiency, while closer to 75% of them were maintaining that approaching or below level grade level proficiency. So, we're hoping the second half of the year to continue to grow them. But the good news is at least a quarter of them are now growing to a point where they are above that grade level proficiency there. So you saw that in exact path data. We did the same thing with the Acadians data as well. Now the benchmarks are slightly different for Acadians. Theirs are above benchmark, at benchmark, below benchmark, or well below. But again, that top chart, we took all of the students who were at or above benchmark at the beginning of the year, said what they do mid-year. Again, over 90% of our students are staying in that category, with the pilots outperforming the Hempfield classrooms. And then in our more fragile students on the bottom, the students who were below benchmark, Acadians, we see more growth with our early literacy skills really being hammered and taught well in those classrooms. We had close to, between 42 and 53% of our students who started the year below benchmark who are now at or above, again, with both of the pilot programs outperforming the Hempfield programs there. Okay, so that, like I said, it was an attempt to try and tell that story a little bit with numbers about, how the programs are and how our students at different learning styles are responding to those programs. Anecdotally, I know some of you were able to ask the staff that as well in some of our listening tours.
That was exact path data.
So one of them, the first one was Exact Pack, the second one was Acadians.
Okay.
So we did that with both.
The only reason I ask the relevance of that is because just, up on the previous slide, on slide 11, the reflection talks about how Exact Path and Acadians really aren't great diagnostic assessments for an ELA program. So, I want to understand that data is there, but I'm also, well aware that, those two measures would not necessarily be measures we would give heavy consideration to related to slide 11.
Yeah, it's not telling me necessarily about the program. It's telling me about the student growth that the students that are in those programs. So, the positive news there is we're seeing that growth, right? We're feeling good about that in all of our setups, no matter which program you're seeing. I see slight advantages in both of the programs that we're using, both Savas and Wit and Wisdom over the Hempfield programs. So that's my takeaway, but certainly have your own questions and observations on the data.
For these scores, actually, there's nothing out there to decide the efficiency of any. It could be math, it could be reading, it could be whatever. There's not programs out there. You use the data to get a general conclusion for it, but it's not saying that Hempfield, Savas, or Wit and Wisdom were the best, because it's obviously the PSSA scores are not designed to test the reading programs. None of these things. When you look at this, it looks like honestly they all have strengths, they all have weaknesses. It's like,
I would agree. The assessments of programs are typically rubrics, right? And I know a heavy consideration, this predates me, but when Mr. Hoffman and the team were going through the selection of programs to pilot, they made sure that they were strong programs, that they were aligned to the science of reading, that they had the components that we needed to even be considered. So those were the assessments of the programs that were important to us.
I looked at some of the sites and
yeah.
Right, it was a quick glance, but both programs were highly recommended. So
One of the challenges that I see with this data is that it is a short period of time, and there were a lot of factors that played into leading up to this data, especially, even being the challenges we had with the COVID situation we hate to bring up, but there were a lot of things that weigh on this, and I just don't know that we've had enough time to see the results of this. I think we could pilot this for a number of years before we would actually get what I would consider valuable data to truly make an educated decision. As much as I'd like to be able to say, that adding another year was helpful or not helpful, I'm not sure the data is going to tell us that. And I guess we have a little more to go, but I'm not holding my breath related to that.
And I would also say like any curriculum, I mean, you want to see it over way more than 2 years. I mean, you want to see it K-6, like, you know, the whole cycle of it. So unless you continue to pilot it for 6 years, you know, which we're not gonna do. You just need that time.
Yeah, and I think I said this before, and maybe I'll just state it again. I think something that would be helpful as we go into this decision would be to have data from districts that have been using it for years, if that data is available. If that data is not available, then let us know that. But I do think adding that to the mix would be wildly helpful related to a decision when it looks like, I mean, honestly, at times everything's back and forth a little bit, but statistically insignificant as it relates to the data that we have.
Yeah, your point's well taken, and I have the same takeaway. I am not hanging my hat on any one of these data points, right? This is not, what these data points are intended to measure, right? It's just an indication to help tell the story, right? And really, like we sat around and said, what is the summary here? Like, how do we pull this together? Even when we were working with the vendors, they were saying, please don't say that all the data that you're going to put in front of the board members is going to tell the story of how strong our program is. They don't even want that, right? Because it's not a true accurate measure. So if I try and make sense of it, that's what we've tried to do on this summary slide here. Throughout this presentation right here, after 2 years of data, there's 50 different elements or data points that are on this presentation that I tallied or scored of saying, if I look at Hempfield's program, if I look at Savas, if I look at Wit and Wisdom, which one is the best score, which one's the middle score, which one's the lowest score, right? And we tallied them. And when you look at those tallies, what you'll see is the Savas and Wit and Wisdom programs consistently came out with stronger best scores. They were the top score more often than the Hempfield curriculum. Again, speaking to the fact that both of those programs are working well. And we really can rely on these programs to show growth in our students. All of them scored in the lowest category about a third of the time. And actually there's a slight typo on this chart. It's 16 each in the lowest score category. But the story is the same. The Savas and Wit and Wisdom programs, I don't see either one of them with our student growth separating from each other. I see them separating from the Hempfield scores, from the Hempfield curriculum, is my greatest takeaway on this. We've talked about it all night, subjectivity and noise and all these data points, and they are, even if we look at other districts, there's a lot of variance and variability in there. But I do think that we are headed in the right direction with the programs that we chose. In terms of next steps, how do we go from here? We are currently, set to administer our survey to students, to elementary teachers, and to parents. Similar to what we did last year, to get some anecdotal information about the programs. We also have been asked and are going to collect survey information from our special ed staff, our itinerant special ed staff who might see the programs in action with some of our special ed students. Our reading specialists, we want to collect survey information from them and even from our substitutes. I know that was one of the asks as we've gone around, and we've actually seen that in some of our tours. What does it look like for a substitute to have these materials in their hands, and how hard or easy is it for them to use those materials? So we're going to try and collect some information from them as well. As Mrs. Johnson said, we are going to be talking to the building principals and have the opportunity to collect their feedback, because they are seeing all the programs and the pros and cons as they work with their teachers and students in the buildings. We will be following up with both companies to discuss all the results that we've gotten over the past couple of years, pull together those final costs. We've been talking to them about what a training and implementation plan will look like for next year. We're planning on bringing all that information back to you at the next Ed Programs meeting, which will be on March 12th. And potentially we'll have a recommendation at that point as to which direction. Did I say that wrong? March 21st, sorry. Thank you. As to a recommendation, and then that could be followed up with a potential vote on April 9th. If we have to adjust because we need more time, we will certainly do that, but that's a rough timeline as to what we're looking at this point.
Could I also ask that as part of these next steps, you include information about the alternative programs that we have? And pardon me for not remembering the names of the other two programs that the district has purchased and how that interacts and intertwines with the decision related to this. I know last year when I came to the classroom, we mapped that out on the whiteboard, as you call.
Yep.
And there are two additional programs that the district pays for to supplement some of our learning. So I want to understand how those two programs and those costs and the continuation or the need, the ability to discontinue those two would impact this and how they're being used. I know one of them at that time was not being used consistently or much at all. The other one was being used. Those are both programs we would have to consider signing agreements for and upgrading and spending additional dollars on. And my understanding is, unless something changed, that one of these programs, and I'll let that open-ended right now, would require us to continue those, and one of them may not. So I'd like to be able to look at this holistically, and if that's the role of the committee, great. If that's the role of administration, I'd like to have that information as part of those next steps. And then also, again, if we can get some data from the programs that have been in place in other districts. I don't know if it's available. I know one has been around a lot longer than another, and I want to understand that. I also want to understand how they mesh together. This decision is much bigger than just the isolated ELA piece, but how do they collaborate with the math program, and how do they both work together? Is there one that would stand out more than another related to that? As far as I'm concerned, I'm not concerned about any of the content related to this, just to clear the air. I'm mostly concerned about the dollars that we spend, that we're getting the best program for our kids and an education. To me, it feels like one of the biggest decisions we've made so far because it's instrumental. It's going to be a long-term decision, and I take it very seriously. So I want to make sure we have all that data as we look at it, especially when a lot of what we're hearing here is statistically not significant enough that puts one way out ahead of another. And even to Mr. Keener's point in the past, show me why these are better than what we currently have. And I remember you not putting words in your mouth, making a statement like that. I think to me, there's no question we need a program. My question is, how does it fit even more holistically, since our results in essence are neck and neck?
I don't want to fully address that right now because I haven't looked at all the notes, all the charts, all the letters, and I haven't matched them all up.
Mrs.
But
Johnson, I don't mean to put you in the spot. I think that's more for administration to address maybe than the committee, but I don't
These are from
know.
what our observations, the committee's observations, not for the administration observations. We can work together to do that, but I can already tell you, I think you're talking about foundations and geos.
Correct.
That
That's
goes
it.
with wit and wisdom. It totally dovetails together. It's part of the curriculum. Savas, it doesn't match the Savas curriculum. And this year, they did not use those. They just used the Savas program. They didn't use anything.
Yeah, you're touching a
additionally.
little more deeply on my request that we have that data, because we pay for both those programs, and both those programs are going to require a renewal and a cost to the district. So I want to be able to look at that holistically to say, if we're going with example, wit and wisdom, we will apparently require, I want to understand that, 2 additional programs that we currently have or may or may not decide to renew. And I want to understand that more. So whether that's the case or not, that's what we heard last year when we were together, that those 2 other programs would be continued related to the choice of one or the other. So I just want that all to be included in your evaluation as you bring forth this, and I didn't see that on the next steps.
Just so everyone's awareness, when you look at the 2 programs, Wit and Wisdom and Savas, with Wit and Wisdom, you have the Wit and Wisdom program, you have Foundations and Geos. We already own Foundations and Geos, no additional cost unless we have to add a section for the classroom.
But there'll be upgrades, if I understand, and extensions of contracts.
No, there's no contracts.
They're not free programs,
No,
correct?
correct. We've already purchased the programs. If they were to update the program, then yes, there would be an additional purchase there. With Savas, everything is within Savas. However, our teachers at the meeting that we just had shared that, again, this is pretty overwhelmingly their suggestion is, if we go with Savas, they want foundations in the primary grades. So one of the questions we've asked Savas is, show us that connection, because you can run Savas and Foundations. and Savas is going to provide us with that material.
That's the information I'd like to have going into this. What else, not just which program, would be continued or discontinued based on that decision? And again, that comes down to how many programs are we looking at in a holistic view of what that cost and that investment would be, and how is that integrated? And I don't know what the answer to that is exactly. I have a ballpark idea, but I'm asking that be part of the discussion as we go into these next decisions.
I think it's a reasonable ask. It's so, I think having some bullet point information, I think it gives you the right view, right? I think I'll throw in one or two more. We could talk about this another day or whatever as we prepare it. But I also think other things too, such as, how easy is it to onboard a teacher with this? What's the training look like? What's the support look like? What's the customer service end look like? What does it look like in year 2 or year 3 with each one? What happens if a student is out for a week or 2 weeks because of illness or because of vacation? Which program will serve that student better or easier, or the teacher better or easier to help that student, right? These are all things that, what about online resources? Which one has what, and what do they do, and how well do they work? So I think a full comprehensive view of, because it's true. I mean, I'm looking at these numbers going, I flip a coin, right? So to me, it's everything else that makes the lives of our teachers, our staff, parents, students easier, better from a business standpoint. What makes the most sense? I don't want to split hers over like $1.38 for one and seven, but I want to make sure that we are taking a look at that. So I think it's a reasonable ask. The comprehensive view would be good. So I think we can add a lot to this, but still keep ourselves out of the weeds.
Just one thing that Mr. Wong said, which I agree, but he mentioned math, and I'm not sure there's a whole lot of correlation between ELA and math, other than you have to be able to read to do math problems. I would say more the science and social studies aspect for elementary than math per se.
That's a good point.
Will the end of year PSSA, that'll be part of the final analysis too?
We won't get that until June, and we need to make a decision no later than June 30th. If that's absolutely crucial for the decision, we certainly will bring it to the table, but we're hoping, especially one of the constraints with making the decision is being able to get the professional development set up for the summer from the company. So we'd like not to wait till June, but if we have to, that's one piece that we could pull in there. Again, to Mr. Walgham's point, I'm not sure that tells a different story. It is going to have some more data with more variance. We've seen that, with the scores that we have, that we are seeing the growth. But again, if that's an S, we can pull it.
Well, whatever makes sense.
Yeah.
Dr. Jennings, my only request is when we see this presentation next month, I would actually like to see the disaggregated survey data that shows this is what the students think, this is what the teachers think, this is what I'd rather not see, this is what all the surveys say. I'd rather see if there are subgroup disparities within the survey results.
Grant, when I compilated my observation notes, which there were a lot, I was trying to.
I'm sorry?
When I was compilating my notes, I did it in those 3 categories. I did it, compare the curriculum, like observations of students, and then observations from teachers. I tried to break it down into those.
Okay.
Like just the curriculum on site, like looking at the books, looking at the students in action, teachers in action and interaction, you know what I mean? Which was really helpful because it was overwhelming if you would just try to look at both compared to each other. It was taking it in those subcategories and then looking at both.
No, I thank you. I think that would be helpful. I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is if I see this disaggregated survey data, the disaggregated notes, and they overwhelmingly go one way or another, that's going to be pretty persuasive for me. If they're all over the place, then I'm going to probably just sit back and defer to people that know more about this than I do.
We will definitely disaggregate that for you.
Dr. Dandridge, will those surveys go to every parent and every student that participated this year? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yes,
And I assume the students will be surveyed separately from the parents.
Correct.
Okay.
and it will be sent through email directly to the parents.
the parent.
Follow up. and
Based-
reminders.
Based on the information that's in Power School, the email addresses in
Correct.
Power School.
Who writes the survey?
Mr. Hoffman and I,
And they solicited input from other people in terms of questions.
Yeah. Which one do you like better? Choose one. Check here.
you'll see all the questions as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, when we were talking, and I probably am misremembering this, when we were talking about data, wasn't there something about we really couldn't find any data, and so we just wanted to look internally?
So we talked to the companies and they were able to provide what they were able to get from other districts.
Okay.
Because at the time, there were districts that were in their first or second year, and not every district uses all the same data points. And so one of the things, again, that Dr. Dandridge talked about that both companies have stressed is not only is it's hard to say that one is better than the other from the data, but also implementation district to district, teacher to teacher could and probably will look different in terms of level of support for students beyond the core instructional classroom. Access to the number of individuals may vary district to district. And also just in the classroom, teachers may approach things a little differently, which is why, Mr. Welcome, you talked about this. In year one of the pilot, some of our Savas teachers felt uncomfortable with the early literacy skills and wanted to embed foundations in. If you talk to the Savas team, if you trust their program and you follow it from K up through, they stand by it. But when you come in 1 year, there's concern that teachers saying, okay, my kids aren't getting it, they're not going to be ready. But this year we said, we need you to trust the program and use it. And that's been a struggle on both sides for teachers to try and stick to it as best as you can from a fidelity standpoint. That's still a hurdle that we're gonna have to overcome.
It's comfortable and it's a security blanket that they've had, and it's uncomfortable letting go of something.
Correct. Yep. But we certainly can ask other districts. I think the piece that we're gonna have to really make sure is we know what that data is in terms of how they've collected it from what type of assessments. Because again, each district may, like, I know a different district that uses one of the programs does not use Exact Path or Cadence. They use something completely different. So now you've got apples and oranges, but you can potentially look at growth, potential growth scores, and try and measure some of those components.
My sense is that growth scores are going to be your best measure of anything related to this, because testing is testing. And I think that's odd in the presentation. I think you highlighted that. So whether they're using a different testing system or scoring system, to me, is insignificant. The bottom line is the growth is where you're going to see, are there results in growth, and how have those young men and women grown with that program? And that takes into account the fact that my growth metric might be lower than Mr. Keener's to start, but yet maybe my growth is parallel to his, even though he's scoring much higher on some of those tests. I'm not suggesting you would, but at the end of the day, I'll give you that credit.
We won't go over it right now, Mr. Walker.
We can debate that later.
So if growth is the thing, I wouldn't be afraid to throw some statistics in there too, because there's all these different numbers and it's very confusing. I'm sure you guys, it's just like, look at all this different stuff, but if growth is the key thing, then maybe we need to zero in on that, along with the surveys and the overall whole picture.
It is also trying to understand the actual use of the program. So are teachers actually following it, or are they incorporating or supplementing because they feel like something else is better? Like, that's an important piece to try and get and understand when you look at some of that data.
The one thing I saw with both was consistency between classrooms. And it was almost as if they were a mirror of the other classroom with a slight, what I would call twist related to how they teach. But overall, there was consistency that I don't think you're going to get with the current Hempfield lacking a program. And that consistency over time is what's going to provide the growth.
You were spot on with that across the board, those in the pilot. Yep.
The pacing is important and it's very helpful. That helps the student, and not students, I'm sorry, substitutes as well. There's good information, good tools for our substitutes. We also talked to some student teachers. Feedback from our teachers is important, and I don't want us to just dismiss that at all. They're willing to put the work in because they already feel like they're seeing results. They're seeing results for themselves in that everybody's on the same page. And they like that. And they don't have to go hunting for extra resources. The resources are right there, whether they're online resources or the resources that are in the teacher's manuals. Is it hard work? Yes. Wit and Wisdom is, generally speaking, a total different approach than most of them have used previously. They use the science of reading, which is the way to go to teach reading. And that's a little bit different too. That's been around for over 20 years and it's very important. There is across the board, for example, we were in one class, it was about matter. They used the word matter and they asked what it was. And one of the little girls said, was it matter as in a scientific way, or is it matter as in, does this matter? And so that was one of the connections that they were making already. Their enthusiasm, well, first of all, they don't sit at their desk very much at all. Lots of enthusiasm. I had to spend a lot of time getting up and down the floor. They feel very comfortable walking around and learning. Their writing skills are better. I'm assuming they're better because second graders were writing sentences that I could read and understand. And I was part of scoring. And I had to readjust to a rubric because I'm used to doing a different grade level, but that was very interesting to read that because their writing level was across the board was really high, I thought. Yeah. I mean, there are other details that teachers brought up that we wouldn't even necessarily pick up on in general, like how they teach spelling, how they teach phonics. Is there enough grammar? The grammar's taught in a way that most of us were not taught grammar. It's woven in. Do the kids like it? There's so many intangibles, I think, about picking this. Does it matter which one we pick? Yes, it matters, but it's not the end of the world if it matters, but in some ways it doesn't matter because both programs are good. But our teachers' opinions, I think, are important because they're the ones that have to be in that classroom teaching it every day. So, if you haven't had a chance to go, I didn't realize you had gone to a classroom before, Justin, but if you
I went
haven't-
last year and this year as well.
I'm glad you did that. I just didn't realize it. And I did have you down, Mike, that you had gone. I know you go frequently. We even had a photograph one week. Yeah, so I don't want to dismiss what we're doing. We put a lot of time and a lot of effort into it. 3 of us are educators. I think that kind of makes a difference. And Pat's a dad. He's very involved with his kids. Yeah, and knows what's going on with them. I've had long conversations with him about that. We did say at one point, we have to have data. And then now what I'm hearing is we don't have enough data. But we have to make a decision in April. We just need to do that for the sake of Mr. Hoffman and the teachers, for sure.
I just want to reiterate, it does matter. It matters. Like, we've spent 2 years investing all of this time, and our teachers have invested a lot of time to pick the best of these 2. You know,
Well,
they're
and
both
when I say
good.
they're both good, and
But we've been
yeah.
tasked to pick which one rises
Exactly.
higher, and we have to
And can we make a wrong choice? Yes. Would it be awful? I don't think so. I mean, I think our kids are still going to learn to read and write but it's the most important decision. It's a hugely important decision.
But I double up on what you've said. I think the ones that are in the room every day, using it, learning to use it, implementing it, studying it, I think that what they're telling us should be weighted.
And it's a wide range. I haven't gone through and like counted the numbers. You know, we saw this many of us and this many loved it and two hated it, or, you know, I haven't looked at it like that. But, it is important, but we're looking at both good programs still.
Thank you.
Is there anything else?
That's it.
Okay, this concludes policy, no. Education, and we're going to policy. Do we need a break or?
Mrs. Johnson, I would suggest that we recess until 7:55 PM.
I need a break, but I can go fast. So whatever.
Pardon me?
I said, I need a break, but I can go fast. so.
Yeah, I would, 7:55?
You
Yeah,
could-
we'll,
you
we'll
would-
recess till 7:55.
You can get back faster, get back.
How about 52? Hold it there. That, we have to, carry the
portion of tonight's meeting. We have 3 policies or 4 policies for first reading consideration, followed by a vaping discussion. Policy 223, 224, and 001 are all policies where no change are recommended. So I guess unless any board member would like to speak to like to propose any changes to any of those 3 policies, I'll go ahead and recommend that we move all 3 of them directly to second reading, simply to update the review date.
I would agree. I've read each and they're very general in nature. They make sense. I'd say I'm good with it.
All right, without objection, 223, 224, and 001 will be moved to second reading. Next, 002, authority and powers. Dr. Musser, it appears that the recommendations are to strip a vast number of the board's powers. I'm sure people are.
That is
curious
that
about
is exactly my intention. No, in the same vein as the board's been handling a lot of policies, making them simpler for the community to consume, and the newest updates with this policy have those powers because they're granted to the board under school code and they're referenced in general in the above paragraphs. All the local school districts and the newest PSBA policy has those lined out items just removed because they're already assumed school board powers. Basically, we're being redundant. So in our past practices with policies, we've kind of deleted some of those redundancies. So I don't feel strongly about it, but that is the new update. If the board wishes to remain that, those powers all still your powers. Doesn't matter how often I delete it.
I agree that it's redundant. Fine with the removal of it. I said I agree with the fact that it's redundant and it could be removed.
All stuff you already can do and have and is identified in school code.
The only thing, and I personally, I agree they are redundant, but I also think it might be helpful for members of the community, rather than going on an odyssey through the 1949 school code, to quickly look at our own policy manual and see what our scope is versus what the administration scope is. But I do think that there are community members who might think that we do things that we do not, or think that the administration does things that the administration does not. And having it delineated, even though it is redundant, might be helpful. That would be my only thought.
That's actually not a bad point, Mr. Keener. Might I suggest that maybe we take this and put it in a document and post it as non-policy on the school district website somewhere for parents, or make it part of reference material, maybe rather than in policy to cover that concern?
Like in the board section
Yeah,
of the website?
where it just lists some of the board functions, but it's not necessarily written out redundantly in policy.
As a new board member, we got that and it was really nice to see board's scope of work and admin's scope of work, and
We can do that.
that's great.
I'll put that in board news. This way you can look at it.
All right, any other questions or comments?
We do this to second readings for.
I mean, it doesn't actually do anything because it doesn't change anything. It looks like it's a lot. I would have no objection in moving it to second. Anyone else?
No objection.
All right, we'll move this directly to second reading. And that brings us to the vape presentation. I'll turn it over to Dr. Grossman and Mr. Schnitzer.
Thank you for having us here tonight. And just wait a moment for Mr. Paul to pull up our slides here. There it is. So we were asked to come here tonight, talk to you a little bit about vaping. And so just want you to be aware, sorry, you want me to say, there we go. You know, what is a vape? You know, vapes come in many shapes, sizes, lots of different types. And so just so, there you go. Next slide, please. So vape is short for vaporizer. It's a device used to vaporize a substance so that people can inhale it. That's where vape comes from. What are they inhaling? Aerosolized substances such as nicotine, could just be flavored water, cannabinoid type products, THC, those types of things. The components of a vape, I've got quite a few here to share with you, which I'll get some out to you here in a minute. But they all have some sort of battery. So for example, This one plugs into a USB, it screws onto this charger, but so you need some sort of battery piece. And then they have an atomizer, okay, which heats up that substance like a heating coil, all right, to make it into an aerosolized form. Has some sort of tank or cartridge to hold whatever it is that's getting vaporized. Typically could be a liquid. They do have such things as dry herb chambers if you want to put some sort of dry herb in there as well. Sometimes you get pre-filled cartridges. Sometimes they can refill these cartridges, and then they all have some sort of mouthpiece also to suck on. So those are just the parts of our vapes. So common vapes that we have at Hempfield High School. Most commonly, we see a lot of disposable vapes. So Mr. Snitzer can show you what some disposable vapes look like. They're pictured in the top left-hand corner up there. And then in the top right-hand corner, we have these vape pens, which look very pen-like. They can sit in your pocket like a pen. This is the bottom part to a vape pen. They have different ways to charge them up, but a pen basically looks like a pen. And then we have the pod type systems, which are also very popular. So this would be a pod type system because you've got your battery and atomizer, and then the pod is what you purchase in the store, and that snaps in. Pod is what contains the substance that's going to be vaporized in the vape. So there's other types. There are much larger versions, but these are this is what we most commonly see at Hempfield High School.
Dr. Brossman, just to
yes.
clarify, you did not purchase any of these, correct?
No, these
I
are.
was thinking that. I didn't want to say it.
I purchased nothing for this presentation. These are all provided by our students.
Mine says 5%. May I ask
They're used.
5% of what?
Most likely that's 5% of nicotine.
Okay.
They have been cleaned. They have been,
Yes,
but these are
yes.
pre-owned,
They're
Thanks for
pre-owned,
clarifying that.
certified.
and they've all been wiped down with hand sanitizer and cleaned up for you, but
Have they been empty?
no. Some of them are full, some are empty. I don't recommend that. Many mouths have been on those, I'm sure. All right, so our next slide, common vapes. All right, so vaping versus smoking, right? So why is this a thing? Like, how does it compare to when most of us were in high school with people, would smoke or adults would smoke? So big thing differences here. Vaping, there's little or no smell versus smoking, you get that strong smoky smell. The act of sucking on one of these can be relatively easy to conceal versus, and even the vapor, they inhale, they can just exhale that into their sleeve or down their shirt or someplace. Again, easy to conceal versus smoking. That smoke, it's pretty easy to see, it's pretty easy to smell. So it's hard to hide when someone's actually smoking. These things all require some sort of battery that they can charge up with a USB type thing or however they charge, or versus smoking, you need matches or a lighter or something to get that started. Sad to say, there's not a lot of stigma around vaping. Many people actually think that it's healthier alternative to smoking. So some people don't think it's that bad versus, there have been ad campaigns and smoking is kind of generally frowned upon in our society. Like there's, you're not allowed to smoke in restaurants anymore. Like, so, so that's a big difference also. As you have a lot of these samples in front of you, there's quite a few choices of fruity and minty flavors to choose from versus, cigarettes. Yes, you can buy like cherry flavored cigars and flavored tobacco, but it's all still pretty smoky. Vapes vary in nicotine levels, THC levels, CBD levels, whereas in cigarettes, you're basically whatever you buy is what you get. And then, so a disposable vape like Mr. Wagner has over there, that pink orange thing, about $12. And that contains the equivalent of about 3 to 4 packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine. versus one pack of 20 cigarettes. The average price in Pennsylvania, I looked up, is $9.54. And then I did go to Turkey Hill and check, and yeah, a pack of Marlboro Reds is like $10.20. So yeah, I think that's the average for, so it's cheaper, it's easier to conceal, it's not as stigmatized. You can see why this is kind of appealing. Next slide, please. All right, so, is this stuff marketed to kids? Well, it's kind of a rhetorical question. Up there in the top left, they actually have these things called vape cups. Kind of resembles a sippy cup, right? When I took this off a kid, I didn't know what I didn't know what it was at first. I was like, what is that? And then I was like, oh, so that's a vape. You charge it from the bottom. It's a disposable vape, but it's got a little straw on it. I've even seen where you can take something like this and get yourself a regular McDonald's cup and take out the straw, put this inside, poke that up through the straw hole, and now you can just walk around and suck on your vape. But yeah, vape cups, right? That top right picture, that's not a candy aisle. That's the aisle for vapes. So yeah, lots of bright, shiny colors. Very enticing for young folks. And then at the bottom there's a brand of highlight vapes made to look like highlighters. So, if these things are intended for adults, I don't know why they need to hide it to make it look like it's a highlighter. And all this stuff is pretty easy to purchase on the internet. If you go to any of those websites, they're going to ask you, are you 21? Click yes, and away you go. So, I would say yes, these things are definitely being marketed to our kids. By further proof, you can see this is one brand's flavors. And I have no desire to vape whatsoever, but I will admit that some of those sound like, wonder what that tastes like. Fiji fruit, frozen peach, lemon berry, they all sound pretty enticing. If we go to the next slide. So the question becomes, where do our students vape? Well, bathrooms. You've heard about that one, bathrooms. Locker rooms. Could they do it in the hallway? Sure. In our classrooms, occasionally we deal with that. On our school buses, yes. And I know what you're thinking. Well, how can they do this on a bus or in a classroom or with all the adults around? Well, again, there's not a whole lot of smell. If there's a smell, it's often fruity, which isn't too different from, those smells that a lot of teenagers wear. They're small and discreet devices. And again, it's a kind of an easy act to conceal. So, how do we detect the vapes? Well, our students tell us about them. Their teachers report things. Sometimes we get reports through Safe to Say. Many times we'll walk in on kids in the act. You'll just see it. We'll see kids handing things off to each other. Multiple students in a bathroom stall together, or kids huddled together. Lots of instances of things just falling out of pockets or being dropped in classrooms. And we do have vape detectors in some locations of the high school that we use to spot trends. Each situation for finding vapes is different. When we have reasonable suspicion to believe a student has something on them, we'll do a search following our policies. And so then if we find a vape or discover students vaping, our consequences currently at the high school, first offense, you're looking at 1 day of out-of-school suspension, and that's with completion of a cessation program. If they don't complete the program or don't want to go along with that, then 2 more days are added onto that. Second offense is a 3-day suspension, and then we're looking at a SAP referral. Don't necessarily have to do a SAP referral on the first offense.
Student
Sorry.
assistance program.
Thank you. Yeah, a student assistance program referral. Don't necessarily have to do that on the first offense because the SAP referral is basically going to say they should do a cessation program. So we're kind of, just doing that right away. Second offense, do a SAP referral. Maybe there's more to it. Third offense, we're looking at a full suspension, SAP referral. And if we suspect the vapes have THC in them, we turn those items over to Officer Stam, our school resource officer. So I just mentioned our cessation program. So I want to talk to you about this a little bit. right off their webpage. Project Connect is specifically designed to motivate participants to make positive choices, including changing their nicotine use, attitudes, and behaviors. So this came to us through the Karen Foundation. I need to give a shout out to Dr. Becker, our 9th grade principal. She worked very hard with the Karen Foundation to get this set up. At the very start, last year we had a cessation program through LGH, and that program fell through because however they were funding that, it got discontinued, I think their grant. So we didn't have this at the start of the year, but I'm happy to say we do have this up and running now. It's an 8-week program. So it's a small group that meets 5 to 12 students. We have them meet during their WIN period, and it's an 8-week program. So 8 Tuesdays or 8 Thursdays, we have it staggered so we can be running multiple groups. So if somebody like gets caught and with a vape, we can offer the cessation program. They don't have to wait a full 8 weeks for one program to be done to jump into the next. We have them staggered so we can keep offering the cessation program. That cessation program, next slide, please.
Who runs that?
The Karen Foundation.
I mean, they have like people.
Yes, they come out. They have a counselor that comes out that's trained, and they take them through a 8-week curriculum, and they cover these topics. They talk about the cycle of addiction, effects of nicotine, recovery symptoms, identification of triggers, stress management techniques, refusal skills, and healthy lifestyle choices. So those are the things that their small group is working through. And so we're, again, Karen Foundation, we've been very happy to partner with them, and that's going well. So I mentioned THC vapes go to our SRO. And so I spoke with Officer Stam a little bit about this topic. He shared with me, you know, the officers on the street don't deal with a whole lot of vaping issues, mostly because of Fourth Amendment search and seizure laws. You know that our search and seizure is different here at the high school, with our burden being reasonable suspicion versus probable cause. So Officer Stam deals with it more because as administrators, we're giving it to him. It's not him as a police officer going and getting these things from the students. So we take the issues to him, and then he has options available to him as a school resource officer, from conversations, and he applies his SRO triad to counseling, having conversations. There could be summary offenses, or there could be up to misdemeanor offenses, depending on the substances, the number of infractions. I'll be quite honest, he does his thing, we do our thing. So if we need to know more about what he does, we could talk to them some more. So our next steps tonight, we just wanted to educate the board a little bit about vapes, what we're seeing, give you some ideas here. Our next steps are to review some of our policies, specifically policy 222 related to tobacco and vaping. We do want to have some further discussion with some local officials about way things are being handled in the community, and at the district magistrate level. And then I think we'll follow up with a policy committee discussion at some point.
So what are your thoughts, the Brossman administration? How do we curtail this? It sounds like it's a difficult one to curtail, but the word we're hearing is it's pretty prevalent in the bathrooms in the school. Any ideas, suggestions, how to knock this back a lot?
So as administrators, we spend a fair amount of time on this issue. And we try to be as consistent as possible with investigating and finding these things out and then applying our consequences. So all that's to say, I think a little bit more conversation, talking with the district magistrate and some other local resources about, how they're viewing things, and is there something else we should be doing consequence-wise? Do our consequences fit with what's happened with the infractions? So those are some things, like if we need to adjust, do we need to go stronger somewhere? Do we need to go in a different direction somewhere? I think that's what needs to be done here.
We definitely believe it needs to be a multifaceted approach. We're not going to discipline our way out of this solely, because we've been doing that and we're still here. So in combination with some station program, counseling, working with local officials and having some conversations, looking at policy. Some of it's going to be staying the course and engaging the community as well, because as Mike mentioned before, this is something that the community is dealing with as well. So continuing to look for partners outside, the Karen Foundation was a great partnership for us and allowed us to handle the sensation program and serve more kids. If there's other training, education, things that we can do for kids, we need to continue to look for that. But it's not an easy problem, or you wouldn't be hearing about it as a board and we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Legality wise, if it doesn't involve cannabis or CBD, is there an age legality? I mean, you said 21 online, but is it like smoking a legal age or
I believe it's 18.
for any?
Yep. Yeah.
So there's nothing unlawful about an 18-year-old student vaping nicotine, just as there's nothing unlawful about an 18-year-old student smoking. They're just a violation of our internal policies.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
As a point of clarity, if a vaping device is found such as this, from the slide, it looked like we only confiscated that if there was a certain, substance in that device. Do we confiscate every device that we find, or do we just take certain ones? Or how does that work?
Every device.
Every device, okay. Yeah, I don't know what more you can do, to be honest with you. It seems like this is somewhat harsh, and it should impact it, but if you're taking their devices, they have to buy another one, they're out of school, they've got to go through a program. I mean, it feels like you're doing a lot to try to curb it, and it still isn't making a dent in it. I don't have a whole lot of suggestions, to be honest.
I'm alarmed that we're talking about cessation from nicotine, because when I was in school, kids just did it to be bad and go smoke in the bathroom, not because they were hooked on cigarettes. Now it sounds like kids are actually hooked on nicotine in high school.
Well, that's true. That is the problem. And as we talked about with these vapes, so one of those carts is the equivalent, I'm sorry, one of those cartridges, sorry, that's the kid's term is cart, right? So those cartridges can contain up to 2 to 3 packs worth of cigarettes of nicotine in them. And you can imagine if you can conceal it, you can be sucking on that nicotine all day long. So yes, kids are getting highly addicted to nicotine, and that addiction, not to draw too many conclusions here, is what's drawing kids together to share these things. And then that's where we get kids congregating in bathrooms like you hear about. And like, it just kind of spirals, you know what I mean? So that's why we'd like to get a better handle on it. But to Mr. Wogelmuth's point, we're throwing a lot of resources at this. And we need some help. So that's why, we wanted to bring it to you, have some more conversation and see what else we can do.
Yeah, I think there's been, at least I've seen on the news, there's more coming out that there's a lot more danger to vaping than they originally thought. I don't know if that could be part of the education, but I know it's a sad state when kids are getting addicted to nicotine in high school. That's just very disturbing to hear.
I think
Sadly, they're not worried about that.
Right. That's the thing. When you're 18, you're not worried about lung scarring. I'm reading them now. Lung scarring, organ damage, addiction, like explosions, asthma. I mean, like, you're 18, you don't care. I guess, by the way, for clarity, the federal age is 18 and Pennsylvania is 21,
Pennsylvania's 21.
according to Dr. Google. Yes, I just looked it up. It said PA.
I did want to share, though, the cessation program is showing some successes. We had a student come up to Mrs. Secor and I today and say, I have friends that should be part of the cessation program. How can they do it? And I'm like, wow, that's just, that changes that thought process. They saw that they're having issues and they're moving forward and they don't want this crutch. But at the same time, a lot of our reports are from students in the bathrooms because they don't want it to be taking place as well. So that is part of that.
So I was going to ask,
having success.
about secondhand smoke in traditional cigarettes. I know for my age group anyway, that was like a big deterrent. Is there research on that? Are vapes different in that secondhand effect? I don't know.
I'm not aware. Sorry.
No, but culturally, that would affect everybody you're around. maybe not just yourself, and that's just a different way to look.
So it's certainly a question I can ask the district physician to see if he has an opinion on that.
And if there, I don't know if there's research on that.
I'm definitely no expert, but I would tell you that there's not the same risk with a vaping to secondhand smoke from a traditional cigarette or cigar.
I would agree.
How do the vape detectors that you do have in place, how do they function? Is it like a smoke detector, but it's picking up that particulate?
Yeah, they're actually air quality monitors. They're monitoring the air quality for a lot more than just vapes. And they monitor a lot of safety features actually. But in general, yes, it's working like a smoke detector, and it's sampling that air and scanning it, and it's tied into our camera system. So we get alerts and reports, and all that goes to our school security officer, not Mr. Ham, not Mr. Stam, Mr. Ham, the school security officer. And but I will tell you, so the alarm goes off until you can get there is the problem. And so we've tried to take a more strategic approach of looking for trends in terms of like, oh, between these periods, this is always going off, and then trying to see, is there a group of students that's always using that, and then confronting it that way.
Are the teachers empowered to take these, or do they have to report to admin?
No, they're empowered to take them. But typically a teacher will walk a student to the office. Teachers aren't empowered to search students. But if they see it, or if, it's in their hand or they're handing it off. But typically our teachers are pretty good about just walking them down or staying with the student and having one of us come to them.
Is most of this occurring in the bathrooms, do you think?
Bathroom, well, I'll let you answer that because
I would say most of them are taking place in the bathrooms. We're seeing quite a bit on the bus. From,
Wow.
Situations and looking in the video, from blowing the vaporized substances underneath the seats and that's how we've caught some students, but we're also seeing it in hallways. We're seeing like blatantly just walking down the hallway, and we'll see it. And I've done a few searches that way as well, right in front of me. But typically bathrooms, I would say a large percentage of it's there.
And do we have any of these alarms in the bathrooms? Are we allowed to put them in there?
yes, that's what
Okay.
the ones that we have are in several of the bathrooms. Yes.
How do they alarm? Is it a loud horn or?
No, it doesn't make an alert to the student. It makes an alert to our security system, to our security guard.
Say if you have a loud horn,
It-
maybe
it-
that'll
You
curb it
can
a little
config-
bit.
You can configure it to do that, but that's not the route we've taken.
And the second that alarm goes off, then they quickly disappear.
Pardon me?
Second the alarm goes off, they quickly disappear. So having the alarm not going off allows someone potentially to get there, if possible, depending on timing, to try and catch students in the act and then possibly do the search and get the device and address the issue.
Right. Because we do not want them flushing the devices down the toilets, because then that clogs the,
It's probably already
pipes.
happened though, right?
yes, it has.
Have we plugged any plumbing yet?
Yes, we have. Yeah, and the district plumber has roto-rooted them out and said, here's your problem.
Is this an issue in the middle schools?
I don't think it's quite as prevalent at the middle schools, but yes, it is.
Okay.
Reading about secondhand aerosol, secondhand smoke, if you will. It is, they're saying just as dangerous.
And that's like a community, yeah, like a bigger.
Cigarette also, because the aerosol risk for particles from that could cause cancer.
Aerosols include heavy metals such as lead, nickel, and zinc, cancer-causing substances as benzene, which has been linked with, and diacetyl, which has been linked with a condition nicknamed popcorn lung.
To be honest with you, it's a shame that these things are even sold as well as cigarettes, because they hurt and kill people. And they're obviously going after our youth. So
Correct.
shame on these companies that make these devices.
And there are significant health issues, and our ER doctors are seeing a significant increase in the side effects of vaping. We actually have one of our local ER doctors coming to an upcoming admin meeting to talk about what they're seeing to try and help for us to be able to relay information out. But this is not something the school can address and solve. It has to be a community approach to be able to start addressing the issue, because what we're finding is When there are storefront openings, what tends to be moving in are the vape shops, tobacco shops, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not about kids being bad, it's about them being addicted. You know, that's a different situation. They're bad and but in the old days, kids would sneak in and smoke a cigarette, not because they were hooked on smoking. They just did it to be bad and try to get away with something. It's a different situation now.
Mr. Maris,
Yes.
earlier, Dr. Bossman used the highlight vape as an example. I Googled it. This is what comes up when you Google highlight vape. And to your point about it being marketed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, quick yes.
Yeah.
I mean. Pretty sober.
I mean, every 40-year-old wants one.
Is there anything going on, do you know, at Pennsylvania legislatively?
I'm not aware legislatively, but given that I'm on the County Health Advisory Council, I've asked that this become a topic at a future meeting where we can have kind of the local impact of what they're seeing and then possibly starting to take a local county approach to try and help educate parents and students on to what Dr. Brossman and Mr. Sister did tonight. Like, what is vaping? And then what do you need to be looking for? How do you need to start addressing this with kids in the home? Yep.
Thanks.
Is there anything we can do as a board? Obviously, we're gonna look at policy, but is there any other things we can do supportive as a board to help with this situation?
I think being open to the conversation right now is great. I know you guys have a lot on your plates, so some time dedicated to this is helpful.
I think there's some small policy adjustments we can make to close up some loopholes in some of our policies that I won't say flat out contradict each other, but sometimes make it difficult to deal with some of the THC levels and how we're classifying certain vapes. So when we bring, we have some policy conversations, the board can certainly help with that. But as Dr. Brossman said, this session tonight was just more about education. So as you're engaging in the community and you're walking around our schools and people are coming up to you that you're aware of the issue and I can speak about it.
Are we reaching out to parents? I'm guessing most of the kids, their parents don't know they're doing this, or am I wrong there?
When as part of the suspension process, they have to be contacted. So parents are contacted in every situation, as well as when a search takes place, the parents are contacted.
But the kids that haven't been caught are still continuing to do it. Do their parents know that they're doing? And if their parents, if we help outreach, educate not just the students, but the parents, could we make some improvements there?
It's a mixed bag. When we talk to parents, some know and they'll
Some may
tell.
vape themselves.
Well, that may be true, but some will say, we've been, searching them daily. We're always searching their room and, so they know, and then it's a matter of time until they get caught at school. And then we have the conversation. Others, it's out of the blue and they had no idea. So it runs the gamut. Yes, we've had situations of the parent comes in and wants the vape back because it's theirs. So, I mean, that happens too. Yes.
But I would guess most of the kids, the parents don't want them vaping. I would guess. Now, I could be wrong.
I think when you look at things that from a parenting standpoint of what you would want your kids to do and not do, I would agree. I think there's a variety of things that parents do not want their kids doing. I think what happens is what becomes the reality of what kids do when their parents aren't there or when the parents aren't looking. If you think back over years, it's kind of it's a natural progression of growing up in some respects. But I think the challenge is, I think there's an expectation that the school addresses this and solves the problem. And part of this educational piece is we can put things in place, but we are alone not going to be able to solve this issue.
This is a societal problem.
Correct. So part of the being open to future discussion as we work on policy, as we start to bring some language back, where is the comfort level of the board in terms of kind of the varying degrees of what we can do and what we should do and what people want to do? That's going to be part of that conversation.
If we can adjust the policy to help support what you're trying to do, then I think that's the role of the board to look at the policy and say, can we tighten the belt on some things with the policy that are appropriate so that you can effectively at least implement this without having some challenges with some things that might contradict each other, to use your point, Dr. Moser.
Are our sanctions for vape usage aligned with our sanctions for nicotine and marijuana usage through traditional delivery methods? In other words, if I'm caught smoking in the bathroom versus vaping in the bathroom, is it the same sanction? Assuming that in both cases, the drug is nicotine.
Yep. So if the drug is nicotine, yes, it is. If the drug is THC, currently it is not.
Okay, and can you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. If you're caught smoking a joint in the bathroom, you're in violation of policy 227, which is our drug and alcohol policy. If you're caught smoking what's called a dab pen, which is a device just like this, but it has an amber liquid in it that has some concentration of THC oil in it. So it has the active ingredient in marijuana and will provide the same high that a joint does. We are currently treating that as a policy of a violation of policy 222, which is our tobacco and vaping policy.
Okay, would it make sense to decouple the delivery mechanism? In other words, and I understand that, my understanding is that there are some vapes that have what I'll call trace amounts of THC in, that do not have enough to be psychoactive. Then it might be more like a piece of hemp rope or a gummy or something like that, that's not psychoactive.
Sure. I think that's a great part of the next conversation to have.
That's it. That's exactly one of the issues that we're having. What percent? How are we testing it?
When we did prep for this meeting, I thought we were going to discuss this a little bit tonight.
No, that's something we're going to discuss at our
Okay,
next
yeah.
meeting. Yep.
But
Yeah, and the elements of what's difficult there to that point is the determination. Our ability to actually there on the spot determine what level versus, when it's turned over to the SRO, they send it out. And when charges, come in play, basically if they end up in court, the cost to evaluate the vape wraps up in court costs.
right,
So-
we could through policy flip that around.
It's possible.
We could say that if you are caught with a dab pen, as you said, Dr. Bosman, there is a rebuttable presumption that that is a violation of our drug and alcohol policy. If you, as the student, want to assert the defense that no, it's not a psychoactive level of THC, but rather it is something else more properly under the base policy, that's fine, but you bear the burden of paying for the testing and showing us that this is not in fact a psychoactive level of THC. And we could probably do that ourselves through policy.
I don't know if it's possible to simplify it, and this is food for thought for the next meeting, but maybe we have a policy that if you're caught with anything related to vaping, cigarettes, that it's a violation of our harshest policy, so that we don't have to spend time trying to determine what's in the pen, how much is in the pen. It seems like a lot of work to do that. I would suggest if we can simplify it and it makes sense, maybe we think about simplifying our policy and just putting everything in one basket. And I'm leaning towards the harsher side of that basket, assuming everything is an illegal drug substance that would fall under the THC category. Just a thought, and maybe that's too harsh, but it sounds like we haven't made much headway with what we have so far.
So would you suggest, Mr. Walgamuth, then, let's stop talking about vapes, let's stop talking about cigarettes, let's stop talking about alcohol. If it is, and we'll call them an age-controlled substance.
Correct.
An age-controlled or illegal substance, there's one set of sanctions, and we can come up with what those sanctions are. Is that a framework that the board would be interested in discussing, or is that too draconian?
I think it would be appropriate to discuss it if administration feels like that's appropriate. I would want to hear from administration to understand if they feel like that's appropriate, but I think it would simplify a lot of the work about trying to figure out what do we do with this and how much of this is in there. that just, it's going to complicate everything. So I don't know. I'd like to hear from the administration.
And that's why we really do need to talk about a couple policies together, as you're referring to, like our 227, our actual drug policy, because I don't think that it's the board's desire to take all these vapes to expulsions. Like, that is not what I don't want
Well,
to put.
but I don't think we know. I think you might be right, but that's why I asked. the
Correct.
question.
Correct.
Maybe take the temperature of the board, and that will in fact then drive what policies are looked at more specifically.
And if you do go it that way, then we change how our discipline, but they all have to work together is the
Right.
point that I'm trying to make. And I think that would be some great future conversation, but tonight was really just about educating what we have, what we're seeing, what we're doing about it. And then, we'll try to get something crafted for the board to consider.
And that in combination with the other things, like the support of the students. I mean, just you saying that students are coming to you asking for it, for me, shows a change in what we traditionally think, they're just doing it to do it. They're asking for help. They're realizing there's addiction involved and they're asking for the resources. So I don't mind getting harsher on the policies, but there has to be other stuff going on to support our students. Because if it just gets harsher and kids are just being suspended, then we're not really supporting our kids. Like, I want it to be a whole thing.
Right, and as Mr. Maris said, they're not necessarily bad kids, they're kids with an addiction. And if we're too harsh unnecessarily, and I don't know where that line is, to be perfectly blunt, but if we're too harsh, we can greatly disrupt somebody's educational and academic future with too harsh of penalties up front, rather than finding that solution more than a penalty.
Well, that's where we can look at a policy and consider what layers do we want to have in place till it would lead to that. And I think sometimes it also, what comes into play is the student's desire to make a change versus their defiance in making a change. And so I think we can somehow work on policy to craft some of those things in there so that everything doesn't just lead to a punitive outcome, but a restorative outcome.
And
Some sort of
student
diversion-
council.
Some sort of, maybe a policy that on its face appears rather harsh, but there are diversion options for first-time offenders, things like that.
You've kind of
Mr.
done.
Wagner, I think you had you were.
No, I was gonna basically say a mixture of both of those things, but you both articulated it better than I would have, so I'm in agreement.
So one other question, have we tried through our health classes or whatever to teach the kids the dangers of vaping? Are we actively looking for opportunities to teach our kids that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's already happening.
That's happening.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Thank you for the education.
You're welcome. You cannot, you don't get to keep the vapes. So they're not party favors.
Guess what?
Guess what? We don't want them. No, you do not.
All right, so what's our timeline here? I think this is a conversation that's interesting. Is it reasonable to maybe at next month's policy committee meeting to give an update around some potential?
Sure, we can
Next steps,
probably have
recommendations?
something together by March.
Okay.
There may be a need for, as they're working on it, to reach out to the policy committee members, just to throw out some ideas, question, comment before we bring it back to the policy committee meeting. So just for those of you on the actual policy committee, just know that they may reach out to you with just some questions.
And
thoughts.
I think this would also
that'd be a great next step.
be an area where the student council might have some good input as well.
Yeah.
If they're interested.
Yeah.
All right, anything further for the policy committee? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Wagner, is there a second? Second by Mrs. Brady, all in favor? We are adjourned, thank you.